Hey everyone, Dave here, and welcome to Tolkien Adaptation Month! It is hard to believe we are coming up on 20 years since Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy began with the release of The Fellowship of the Ring. Oh, I remember that release well. I grew up in a Tolkien-loving family. My dad read The Hobbit to me when I was very young, and then I read it myself when I was a little bit older, and then I read the trilogy when I was slightly older than that, but still way too young to actually understand half of it, and I knew more than anything that I wanted to grow up to bring Middle-earth to the big screen. Then I found out some guy from New Zealand was beating me to the punch. So I awaited the filmed adaptation of Fellowship of the Ring with half excitement and half bitterness. My parents pulled me and my siblings out of school for opening day, and we sat there and we watched the film. And well, I was sad to say it, but reluctantly I had to admit that it was very good. They went with the right guy. They shouldn't have waited for me to grow up to make the movie. Yeah, it's not exactly a hot take, but I think the Lord of the Rings movies are quite good. All of the stars aligned as a director and crew with a dedicated vision for the text worked with a cast with incredible chemistry in some of the most beautiful locations in the world at a time when filmmaking technology had finally allowed this story to be shot believably. I love all three movies almost as much as I love the books. That said, I still have my nitpicks about the movies. So, to kick off Tolkien Adaptation Month, welcome to the D-List, the show where I list things and my name begins with a D. Yep, we're counting down my biggest nitpicks about Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies. Movies that I love, don't get me wrong. But they still have a couple of things I would have done differently if I were making the films. Or things that annoy me or take me out of them for a moment every time. And I figure the 20th anniversary is a good enough time to discuss them. And I'll be the first to admit that most of these gripes, they're gonna get petty. Really petty. You'll probably frequently find it a strange thing that I should suffer so much annoyance for so small a thing. Such a little thing. And no, I'm not saying any of these things ruin the movie. They're not sins, they're just choices I disagree with. And hey, even the crew of the film had plenty of choices that they disagreed with.
It's like the Legolas sliding down the shield thing. I winced, and I wince every time I see that. And that's one thing it's been a weird thing for me ever since day one with storyboarding Peter. He gets me to storyboard stuff, and I'm just rolling my eyes going, man, that is just too way out there. That's too nuts.
And yes, pretty much all of these are changes from things that I personally liked better in the book. And no, none of them are asking why the Eagles don't take them to Mount Doom. Yes, that joke was very funny when I first heard it in like 1999. It's not actually a legitimate critique, even if the director sometimes needs to be reminded of that himself.
Does Tolkien ever explain why they don't just get Gwaihir back and fly to the Crack of Doom and drop the ring in the Crack of Doom from using the eagle?
Yes, he does. Yes.
Oh, does he?
The Eagles are their own race. They're not necessarily part of this world, and that they do things for very specific reasons.
Well, when they decided at Rivendell to destroy the ring, why they didn't just summon up Gwaihir the eagle and fly to Mount Doom and drop it in?
Yeah, but that's because of the Nazgul.
Yeah, no, I knew that.
You knew that.
I knew that. It does make you wonder why they didn't summon an eagle at Rivendell and just have the eagle fly to Mordor.
The Nazgul would have taken them out.
Yes, I know, we've already discussed it, haven't we?
Everybody always says that, but...
So without further ado, here are my biggest nitpicks about the Lord of the Rings movies. Number 11. The road goes ever on and on. So when Gandalf arrives at the Shire at the beginning of Fellowship, he's singing some familiar lyrics.
The road goes ever on and on.
I do think it's a nice touch that on his way to visiting Bilbo, he's reciting Bilbo's own poetry, but there's something that bugs me just a little bit about this scene, and no, it's not that they didn't use the Donald Swan version of the tune.
The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began.
Yes, that is the version that was actually approved by Tolkien himself, making it the canon version as far as most people are concerned. But I like this bouncy version of the tune too. This feels like a walking song, so props to Fran for this one.
The song is taken, of course, from the poem, And the music, the tune was composed by Fran. She came up with that the last second.
So no, it's not the tune that bothers me. The thing that bothers me is what version of the lyrics they use.
You're late.
That is not the version Bilbo sang coming home at the end of The Hobbit. That's the version he recites upon leaving Bag End after the birthday party. And yes, the movie keeps that part too.
Until our next meeting.
But why is Gandalf singing that melancholy version about following the road if he can before a joyous occasion? He doesn't know yet that a dangerous quest is about to launch. Even in all his wisdom, he's still not 100% sure about the truth of the ring just yet. And it just raises the question for me of, in this adaptation of the story, did Bilbo write that version earlier and already share it with Gandalf? I could be wrong about this, but the impression I got from the book is that he was reciting it extemporaneously when he was leaving Bag End, just like he recited the original version extemporaneously when he came home to Bag End. I mean, I guess if he had written it earlier, that explains why Frodo can recite this version almost verbatim in Chapter 3. He wasn't, like, sharing a mind with Bilbo, he just had heard that version before. Of course, they drop him singing it in the movie, so it's not set up for that. So, is it just because they don't have the rights to the version Bilbo actually sings in The Hobbit? Oh, what do you want from me? I warned you that some of these would get real petty. Number 10. Gandalf's sudden but brief disdain for hobbits.
Salted pork is particularly good.
Hobbits.
That reaction seems so out of character. Gandalf is the only wizard who loves hobbits. He's practically obsessed with them. He's like an undergrad who studied abroad a year in Hobbiton and won't shut up about their pipeweed.
Your love of the halfling's leaf has clearly slowed your mind.
He wouldn't react that grumpily to hobbit culture as a whole. He might be annoyed by these hobbits specifically, and he has been, many times, but it would have made much more sense for him to just scoff, "Fool of a took," here. Number 9. Éomer versus Gimli. So this exchange here feels abrupt.
Speak quickly. Give me your name, Horsemaster, and I shall give you mine.
I would cut off your head, dwarf, if it stood but a little higher from the ground.
You would die before your stroke fell.
Things got tense real quickly here. And the thing is, this exchange is in the book, but the tension is a little more motivated, as Gimli is extra rude to Éomer, because Éomer had just insulted Galadriel. So naturally, Gimli had to snap back, and things escalate tensely, but, like, not inappropriately. But I suspect that they might have filmed the full version of this scene because the filmmakers talk about how important it was to put Gimli's love of Galadriel back in the extended edition of Fellowship because it's something that will come back in the next movie. I guess that was before they decided that even the extended edition really needed those couple seconds to be shaved. So now Éomer just threatens to murder Gimli while insulting his entire race just because Gimli bucked polite tradition.
Give me your name, Horsemaster.
I would cut off your head, dwarf.
Look, he's having a hard day. Theoden no longer recognizes friend from foe, so Éomer might be acting a little hasty. I know some nearby creatures who might be able to help him with that. Number 8. Why doesn't Glamdring glow? So we all know about how Gandalf got his sword from the troll cave in The Hobbit, and Elrond recognized it as Glamdring, an elf blade made for the Goblin Wars of Gondolin. Much like Orcrist and Sting, also retrieved from the cave, the sword glows when orcs are near. Unless you're in the movie.
Somebody asked me why Glamdring wasn't glowing. I must admit I didn't know why.
Probably due to budgetary cutbacks.
Budgetary cuts. Not enough blue left.
It has been suggested that maybe people who haven't read the book would be too confused by another sword glowing without explanation, but I think general audiences would understand if Gandalf had the same kind of magic sword as Frodo. Now I will accept that maybe Gandalf's sword in the movie is not Glamdring. The same way Aragorn has a different sword in the movie because the shards of Narsil are still in Rivendell. I will accept that, but I demand an elaborate backstory for this Gandalf sword too. Chop chop, get to writing, Philippa and Fran. Number 7. Everything about Farmer Maggot. So a while back, my friend Dominic Noble made a video where, spoiler alert, he talked about how Farmer Maggot's character is so different in the movie that he doesn't even qualify as the same character from the book. Basically, his qualm was that Farmer Maggot in the movie is a sniveling worm, and Farmer Maggot in the book is a tough badass who stands up to the Ringwraith sternly. Now, Dom is absolutely correct that Farmer Maggot's portrayal in the movie is not consistent with Farmer Maggot's portrayal in the book. Here's the thing. Farmer Maggot's portrayal in the movie isn't even consistent with Farmer Maggot's portrayal in the same movie. Like, clearly, this is supposed to be Farmer Maggot. He's got the dog and he has the exchange with the Ringwraith. But then later in the scene where he's actually named, his voice is a completely different person. And this is the one where his attitude is much closer to his attitude towards the Ringwraith in the book. Honestly, he should just always be portrayed like this. Oi! Go back to where you came from, you! Got a tall English breakfast tea for Farmer Maggot? Oi! Give me that beverage there, you! Oi! Let me into the group there, you!
For the last time, you're technically in the movie. You don't belong here. Love you, honey. I'll see you at home. All right. Welcome to the support group for Lord of the Rings characters left out of the movies.
Now, eliminating the part where Maggot stands up to the Ringwraith is a shame because it was an early example of the book's theme of ordinary people standing up to evil. And in the text, we would later find out that Farmer Maggot is far from the only hobbit willing to stand up to evil, although some of the others needed a little help. We'll get to that. Still, while it's sad to lose this specific example of the theme, it's a theme the movies fortunately do not ignore elsewhere. I mean, Galadriel drives it home pretty explicitly.
Even the smallest person can change the course of the future.
But I think the biggest thing Maggot's adaptation from book to movie loses is, ironically, the sense of loss he represents for Frodo. In the movie, Merry and Pippin steal from him because they're wacky comic relief, but in the book, Merry and Pippin are actually very good friends with Farmer Maggot. Frodo used to steal from him when he was a small child, and he's been so scared of him ever since that he hasn't dared set foot on his property or meet him again as an adult. But now Frodo realizes that he and Maggot could have been very good friends this whole time, and it hits hard for him what he's losing now that he's saying goodbye to the Shire, possibly forever. The missed opportunity for this relationship is a reflection of everything he's losing by going on this quest. Frodo says he'll come back if he can, and Maggot says he'll be welcomed back with open arms, never knowing that Frodo's planning on leaving for good. It's a small but heartbreaking moment. But, you know, in the movie version, we got a joke where the hobbits almost land in poop, so trade-off.
Ooh, that was close.
But okay, including the Farmer Maggot episode as it appears in the book would be a little bit of a long diversion for this point in the movie, and I don't dislike Merry and Pippin as comic relief characters, and I understand the arc of showing them being irresponsible early on so they can have their growth on the quest. Fine. So I understand the function of this scene in the movie, and I can be persuaded that it's worth having this way. So then I just have one question about it. How the hell does Sam know who Farmer Maggot is?
If I take one more step, it'll be the farthest away from home I've ever been. You've been into Farmer Maggot's crop!
I guess Sam just knows everything about every farm that he's never set foot anywhere near before? I mean, I wouldn't put it past him to just spend all his time studying maps only of farmland, but still, come on. Number 6. Pippin the Dumbass. Now, much has been discussed about how many characters from the book were kinda reduced to comic relief for so much of their runtime. Gimli in Two Towers particularly has much of his dignity stripped away because, hey, aren't dwarves funny? Merry and Pippin also start out a lot goofier than they do in the book, although at least there it's in service of actual character arcs. Now, for the most part, I don't really dislike any of the individual comic relief moments for any of these characters, even if I wish they were tempered with a few more dignified moments. But in the general goofification of the characters, there's one moment that's not played for comic relief that really bugs me.
Baggins? Sure I know a Baggins. He's over there. Frodo Baggins.
Pippin, you blundering dolt! You literally just heard him call himself Underhill! And presumably at some point during the 4 chapters that were skipped between the fairy and Bree, Frodo told you how important it was to call him Underhill. I think the idea here is supposed to be that he's drunk, but it just makes him look irredeemably stupid. And the irony is, I'm pretty sure this moment is here to replace a moment the filmmakers thought was too silly for the film. In the book, Frodo's accidental disappearance at the Prancing Pony came about because the ring slipped on his finger when he got a little too into singing the extended edition of Hey Diddle Diddle the Cat and the Fiddle. Yeah, that one's a Bilbo original. But of course, that wouldn't fit in with this scary, alienating version of Bree, so instead we'll just give the Fool of a Took the mother of all unforced errors. I'm surprised Frodo didn't just leave you there after all this. Number 5. The Fickle Ents. So in Book 3, Chapter 4, Treebeard, Merry and Pippin meet, well, Treebeard. He is aware of what Saruman is up to, and he believes something must be done. But first he has to spend several days at the Entmoot, explaining all the facts and events to the other Ents, and letting them decide what course of action they want to take. But once the Ents reach their decision, they march on Isengard, and they take down all the evil industrial waste caused by Saruman's mind of metal and wheels, with the power of raw, untouched nature! But in the movie, the Ents decide not to do anything.
This is not our war.
Yeah, apparently these are really isolationist Ents. This pisses Merry off. He calls them out, and when he explains the stakes to Pippin, Pippin tricks Treebeard into seeing how Saruman's evil affects the Ents and trees personally. So then Treebeard gets pissed off, summons all the Ents immediately, and then they march on Isengard.
Many of these trees were my friends.
Look, I understand that for various reasons, including notions of pacing and keeping the timelines correct, they chose to tack the beginning of the Two Towers onto the end of Fellowship of the Ring, and the end of Two Towers onto the beginning of Return of the King. So that left them with exactly 2 chapters of Merry and Pippin to stretch out over the movie. What's more, these are 2 chapters where Merry and Pippin are kinda reactive all throughout, so I also understand the desire to give Merry and Pippin more agency at this part of the story. Have them actually motivate the Ents to do something instead of just witnessing it when it happens. But this makes the Ents look really selfish. It takes them so much time to just lay out the abstract information so they can say no, but as soon as it personally affects someone they care about, they can just hastily make a snap judgment? Yeah, who knew the one thing that motivated Ents to hastiness was their own nepotism? It feels like to finally give Merry and Pippin some dignity, they had to strip it from an entire other race. Ah well, the march itself was cool. Number 4. The sexification of Aragorn. Okay, strap in everyone, because these are starting to get a little more complicated. Now, I'm not referring to the fact that Viggo Mortensen is physically attractive. I'm referring more to the changes in Aragorn's whole vibe that all seem to be in the service of making him emotionally sexy. See, in the book, Aragorn is confident and steadfast, but he still has his moments of vulnerability and uncertainty. In the movie, these adjectives all still apply, but they've switched around where they apply. In the book, Aragorn is confident in his destiny to become King of Gondor. The time is not right yet, but he knows it's gonna happen. But that's not sexy. He needs to be a tortured soul. He needs to be uncertain about his destiny, and uncertain about the relationship with the hot elf maiden who is literally throwing her life away for him. He needs to be uncertain about everything beyond his immediate tasks.
You are Isildur's heir, not Isildur himself. You are not bound to his fate.
The same blood flows in my veins. Same weakness. You cannot give me this.
It is mine to give to whom I will. Like my heart.
Anidonia broniatha. Ara periatham. Athari methi de damarham.
That choice is yet before her. You have your own choice to make, Aragorn.
But then when you get to his immediate tasks, oh, now he's confident in a sexy way. In the book, Aragorn struggles over a lot of decisions, especially after Gandalf falls in Moria. He feels the pressure of being left in charge, and he actually stops for a moment to mourn. Unlike in the movie, where only the bad guy fights for the Fellowship's right to sit in their grief.
Give them a moment, for pity's sake!
By nightfall, these hills will be swarming with orcs.
Oh, and let's not get started on how, in the book, Aragorn is genuinely interested in helping Boromir and Gondor. He just knows the ring won't help them, so he doesn't know exactly how to incorporate that task into the larger quest. How does that play in the movie?
I will not lead the ring within 100 leagues of your city.
Boy, they are not here to make friends. And after the breaking of the Fellowship, in the book, Aragorn wrestles for several pages over what to do. Does he follow Frodo? Does he go to Gondor? Does he track the orcs? It's a tough decision to make. There's no easy answers, and he agonizes over it for a while. In the movie, he's just in full badass action hero mode.
Leave all that can be spared behind.
We travel light. Let us hunt some orc.
Ah yes, it's Tolkien's gift for language that really drew everybody into this trilogy. Again. I understand how they got to these decisions. I understand the desire to give Aragorn a self-actualization arc. And I understand that if you already have him insecure about his destiny, you'd better make him confident in other ways so he doesn't just seem mopey. It's just funny to me that the result is basically the Aragorn version of that evil character be like insert opposite of character's catchphrase meme. I think they could have crafted an interesting arc for Aragorn that didn't involve tortured soul self-doubt. Maybe he actually starts out arrogant about his destiny and has to learn humility. Maybe he starts out kinda dismissive or condescending to dwarves and hobbits, and he has to learn how to truly respect all the peoples of Middle-earth before he can lead his own people. There were ways to have him need to earn his throne without it just being, but I don't wanna update live journal, current mood brooding. And personally, I just think that having a heroic leader who still struggles with individual decisions in battle is more interesting than a confident, always correct guy who happens to be grumpy about what he needs to do later. You could have shown that heroism doesn't always mean having all the answers right away, but that's not as sexy as a tortured soul who knows exactly what steps to take anyway. Number 3, the joylessness of elves. Okay, so there are a lot of places in the movie that have a darker tone than they do in the books. Like, I already touched on this in Bree. In the book, the prancing pony has some elements of discomfort, especially for Sam, but overall it was a warm and welcoming place filled with hobbits as well as men, all of whom were excited to meet Mr. Underhill and his friends. There were some creeps at the bar, and things got more and more sinister in Bree as the night went on, but it didn't start out as the alienating, scary, 100% unfamiliar land it is in the movie. But that I don't have a problem with. I think it makes sense for the movie. It's in keeping with Peter Jackson's horror experience. It's fine for the world to be scary here. Not every darkening of Middle-earth for the movie is the wrong choice, but there's one thing about Middle-earth that really could have used a little more light than Jackson gave it, and it's the race that's kind of the key focus of Middle-earth. Why do we never see the elves being joyful? Aside from the prologue, the first elves we see in the film are the elves Frodo and Sam see going to the Grey Havens in the extended edition.
They're going to the harbor beyond the White Towers. To the Grey Havens. They're leaving Middle-earth.
Had this been an accurate adaptation of this elf encounter, Gildor would have been singing songs with them and giving them food and drink, while also offering dire warnings, but it would have been in contrast to the elves' default state of joy. The elves being seriously concerned shows just how serious things are getting.
Where's Gildor?
Oh, he thinks he's in the extended edition.
Where?
Those elves that Frodo and Sam see in the woods.
So he thinks one of those extras is him, even though there's none of the conversation, or singing, or merrymaking.
It's about as accurate a depiction as they gave your husband.
Then there's Rivendell, which the setting looks appropriately warm and welcoming. It is the last homely house, but we don't really see any elves making merry there. we barely see any elves there, period. Outside of Elrond, Arwen, and the Council, and who can tell how many of those elves came from Mirkwood, there's like 2 or 3 deep background elves somewhere.
You see this out-of-focus guy walking in the background.
And Lothlorien is straight up sinister.
I know there were some comments from people once they saw the movie feeling that Galadriel was a lot heavier and darker than she was in the books, and that's true to some extent. We did play her that way.
Galadriel's a character that, I mean, it was so successfully portrayed that you are scared of her, or you never really lock onto her. You never understand her, or, you know, she feels very inhuman. And almost when they're leaving Lothlorien, it's almost a relief.
When I read this sequence in the book, it's an elf paradise that they're so grateful. It's like the jeopardy is completely taken away, and they're able to relax. He thought that in the movie, it would totally undermine the kind of the conflict of and the drama of the story.
Again, I understand that this is a dark part of the story, and I understand why the mood is low right now, but Galadriel is scary. Even before she's scary, she's unsettling as hell. Later on in the book, Frodo claims that this was the last time he had a laugh. Can't really picture a lot of laughing here. If you want us to be sad that the elves' time is over, it would help if the elves being around didn't feel like such a bummer.
I don't know why. It makes me sad.
Number 2, everything about Faramir. Man, was this a wasted opportunity. So, Faramir, brother of Boromir. In the book, Faramir finds out that Frodo has the ring, and he seems to toy with him a little bit. So that is the answer to all the riddles. The one ring that was thought to have perished from the world. And Boromir tried to take it by force, and you escaped, and ran all the way to me. And here in the wild I have you, 2 halflings, and a host of men at my call, and the ring of rings, a pretty stroke of fortune. A chance for Faramir, captain of Gondor, to show his quality. Ha. And then, he doesn't take the ring. Not if he found it on the highway would he take it. Faramir recognizes Boromir's flaw and avoids repeating his mistake. It is the single most badass thing a human man does in Lord of the Rings. In a single moment, Faramir shows his quality. It's a small moment that gives so much hope to the world. If a man can resist the evil of the ring, maybe the time of the elves passing and men becoming the dominant race won't be so completely terrible after all. So, you know, can't have that in the movie.
I came on the project not having read the book. The script had been written, so that was the Faramir that I knew. Then I read the book and I saw that there was a major difference between the script and the book.
The ring will go to Gondor.
Hate it, hate everything about it. Where do I even begin on how much I hate this change? First off, they set everything up for you to expect this, especially in the extended edition where they delve into the Steward of Gondor family backstory. Everything is building to the moment where Faramir is given this opportunity, and everything is telling you that if he had the ring, he would take it like Boromir tried to. So what a perfect, memorable piece of filmmaking it would be to subvert that expectation, to give him a moment of strength instead. So it's wild that the movie treats this like it is a subversion, with Sam reacting with surprise to Faramir's decision, but it's only a subversion to people who have read the book, who by and large are not going to be happy about this change. For people who are coming in blind to the movie, they're expecting the big guy to take the ring from Frodo, and then they got what they expected. No subversion happening, just spending several minutes hinting that something's gonna happen, and then that thing happens.
Weirdly diminishes the ring's power if Faramir can so readily resist its lure. That was one of the strong thoughts we had.
Okay, 2 things. First off, you didn't seem to have that concern when you wrote a brand new scene to give stupid sexy Aragorn the same challenge at the end of the movie.
I would have gone with you to the end.
Oh look, he overcame Isildur's weakness. That means his arc is over now, right? Second off, if you're trying to show the power the ring has over people, I do not think you succeeded. I think you showed the power Denethor has over Faramir.
Well, the fact that Faramir is
immediately opposed to taking the ring in the book, as opposed to where in the movie it's a long, drawn-out decision that he has to make. And ultimately, his first inclination is to take the ring. And that changed because the focus suddenly became his relationship to his father.
Faramir's not doing this because of the ring's temptation. He just has to prove himself to his neglectful father. He's not succumbing to the power of the ring. It just feels like him succumbing to his daddy issues.
Once we knew very early on that we weren't going to be able to fit Shelob into film 2, that decision was made very early on. We needed to drive Frodo and Sam's story towards some kind of climax. For all those people that sort of have a problem with this, I think you just need to play out the story in your mind without this sequence for Frodo and Sam.
Okay, but there still could have been a different climax to this through line, you know? Maybe Faramir's camp gets attacked and he has to fight alongside the hobbits. Maybe he leads them down another path and gets ambushed, so they have to go with Gollum again. Maybe somebody else in Faramir's company tries to take the ring and Faramir has to rescue Frodo from the turncoat. There were alternate solutions. You didn't have to completely engage in full-on character assassination.
It's all wrong. By rights, we shouldn't even be here.
Faramir's whole family gets some sketchy treatment in the movies. Boromir comes off best, but they still amp up the sinister moments in a way that sometimes makes him feel less like a man corrupted and more like a bad guy who's good at hiding it sometimes. And Denethor definitely takes a downgrade in dignity, but at least when it happens to him, it's hilarious.
Ibrahim?
Perhaps it's a good thing I got cut. Did you see what they did to my in-laws? Not pretty.
And my number one nitpick about Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, as far back as before the first movie came out, I had already heard this was happening. Part of me held out hope that the rumors were false, that they were going to secretly surprise everyone. But alas, it was true. They cut out the best chapter in the entire book. Cutting the Scouring of the Shire. Okay, so the Scouring of the Shire. For people who haven't read the book, you may have heard about this chapter, but you might not really know what it involves, so let me explain. When the hobbits return to the Shire, they find that all is not well. The Shire is under rough management ever since Lotho Sackville Baggins started calling himself the Chief. But since the hobbits just saved all of Middle-earth, they are well equipped to handle this threat. They quickly dispose of ruffians who had caused them trouble in their more innocent days, including Bill Ferny. They're arrested, technically, but the hobbits end up bossing around their captors more than the other way around. They find that the Shire has been devastated with ugly houses built and trees chopped down willy-nilly. They encounter some human ruffians from Isengard who tell them that Lotho answers to someone named Sharky. The ruffians try to mock and intimidate the hobbits, but they don't expect the hobbits to stand up to them, swords at the ready, so the ruffians just run away. The four hobbits decide to get all the good oppressed hobbits of the Shire together to overthrow their oppressors. Sam goes to recruit old farmer Tom Cotton, and he's like, hell yeah, finally, let's do this. And Tom's daughter Rosie is all like, go get him, Sam, and may I add, damn, you're looking fine. And the gang has gathered 100 hobbits to fight, all of whom have been wanting to stand up to the chief and Sharky, but none of whom had the courage to get things started on their own. Basically, the hobbits unionized the Shire. When the cops arrive to break this militia up, half of the cops are like, screw this, we're joining you, let's take down those bastards. And the rest of the cops just leave. They scram so fast you'd think their supervisors told them to start considering public health. Farmer Cotton mentions that the only hobbits who haven't been taken over are the Tooks because those Tooks fight back. So Pippin goes to recruit his kin to the cause. Then the ruffians come back, so the hobbit militia hides. The ruffians try to arrest Farmer Cotton, and the militia ambushes them like Ewoks. Mary's all like, get out of here. And the leader of the ruffians is like, whatever, we can take these pipsqueaks. He goes to attack Mary, and the ruffian leader is immediately shot dead by 4 hobbit arrows. The other ruffians surrender. Cotton then tells them more about what's been going on, including that Lotho's own mother Lobelia was arrested by Sharky's men. Sam finds his father, the Gaffer, and Frodo tells the Gaffer all about Sam's great deeds and newfound fame, which Rosie Cotton is very interested to hear. The Tooks arrive, more ruffians arrive, the Battle of Bywater breaks out. It's bloody. The hobbits win, but not without some casualties. But don't worry, no named characters are killed. Frodo is the only one who never draws his sword, and indeed, basically he spends the entire battle reminding the other citizens not to kill enemies who have surrendered. Apparently the hobbits have awakened their own bloodlust. The hobbits decide it's time they went to the big boss, and on their way they see that the party tree has been cut down, which is the final straw for Sam. The 4 hobbits go into Bag End, which is in shambles, and they discover Sharky there. Turns out, it's Saruman. Saruman got his revenge for the destruction of Orthanc by trying to destroy the Shire. As much as the hobbits are angry about the damage he's done, they mostly just think he's pathetic. This is what the Great White Wizard has been reduced to, taking out petty revenge on the least threatening corner of Middle-earth. Frodo insists that nobody kill him, that they just let him go and lead the rest of his sad life. Saruman repays this by trying to stab Frodo, but he's wearing the mithril, and Frodo's still like, spare him, hopefully he can get the help he needs, and this pisses Saruman off. Saruman starts to leave with Wormtongue, but Frodo says to Wormtongue, hey, you don't need to follow him, as far as I know you haven't wronged us, and Saruman's all like, ha ha, Wormtongue killed Lotho, he might have even eaten him too. Saruman just keeps taunting Wormtongue, and then Wormtongue's had enough, and he slashes Saruman's throat. But before he can escape, he's shot dead by hobbit arrows. A dark mist rises from Saruman's body for a moment, but it dissipates and the body shrivels up. Then the hobbits begin cleaning up, they release everyone from jail, and Lobelia's shocked that people are happy to see her. But she's heartbroken at Lotho's death, and she becomes a new woman, giving Bag End back to Frodo and leaving her wealth to help the oppressed hobbits recover. As for the 4 hobbits, they lead the various parts of cleanup. Merry and Pippin, being great warriors of Rohan and Gondor, drive out any remaining ruffians. Sam replants trees with special soil he got from Galadriel, and he plants a Malorn tree where the party tree was. Frodo becomes deputy mayor and defunds the police. Then Sam marries Rosie, and they move into Bag End with Frodo until it's time for Frodo to leave Middle-earth. Everything about it is awesome. But it often gets cut from adaptations because the sense is that when the ring is destroyed, the goal is achieved and the story's over. Leaving in this extra little adventure at the end after the purported goal is accomplished might make the ending feel like it's dragging on too long. Yep, they sure dodged a bullet there.
Lord of the Rings with 11 nominations. Yes. 11 nominations. One for each ending. And let me tell you something else, folks.
And don't worry, I saw the last Lord of the Rings. I'm not going to have the movie end like 17 times.
Anyway, then we make our way from the pre-show area into another pre-show area. This is like watching Lord of the Rings backwards.
There are many reasons why the scouring of the Shire is important to the text, and many reasons why cutting it, at least cutting it the way they did, was detrimental to the story. So many reasons, in fact, that I think it's time for the first ever D-list in a D-list. Here are the top 4 reasons this movie screwed up by eliminating the scouring of the Shire. Number 1-4. It is the essential finale of the Hobbit's arc. So 2 things are true when the Hobbits return to the Shire. 1, they have been changed by the horrors they face and find it challenging to go back to a normal life. 2, they are now prepared to handle any conflict they face. To the movie's credit, it captures 1 really well.
I felt that it actually was what Tolkien had in mind, and I wanted to dramatize it. And one of the things that just about all veterans of the First World War talk about is a sense of coming home to their families and their village. They've been thoroughly changed by the experience. They've gone through horrors that they could never describe, and they literally couldn't talk to anyone about it, so therefore nobody understood. And the only people that understood were those other friends that had been to war.
That part, that's all great. 10 out of 10, no notes. But what gets lost is the Hobbits' newfound strength, their growth. The Hobbits have faced real evil in the world, and now the petty squabblings of the Shire are a piece of cake for them. Now even Saruman, once the most powerful wizard of them all, is no match for them. The movie covers the loss of innocence from their adventure, but I don't think it properly covers the gaining of wisdom and experience from their adventure. The only positive things they seem to gain from their quest are Gondor bows to them, which, yes, this scene does get me every time, and also Sam gets the courage to propose to Rosie. Speaking of which, number 1-3. It establishes an actual relationship between Sam and Rosie. Now, I'm not saying that either version of Rosie Cotton, movie or book, is exactly the most fleshed out character. Either way, her purpose is pretty much to fawn over Sam, but the Scouring shows, actual reasons that she'd be into Sam. In the book, Rosie implies she was actually always into Sam and just waiting for him to get over his shyness, and she's all the more impressed with him now. The movie Rosie is nice to Sam, which I guess in movie language means into him, but it's certainly a flimsier basis for a relationship, especially compared to his infinitely better developed relationship with Frodo. It's no wonder people accuse the movie marriage of being another case of Hollywood no homo. In the book, we get confirmation that Rosie likes Sam before we're even certain that he likes her. Again, it's the bare minimum of groundwork for a romantic relationship, but it's a hell of a lot better than the movie gives. Also, couldn't they at least have kept the part where Sam and Rosie move into Bag End so that the final shot would have been of Bag End and not some other hobbit hole we have no emotional attachment to? Number 1-2. It shows that the Shire is not so safe from the outside world. I think what sucks most about the way they cut the Scouring is that they confirm that it didn't happen at all.
And if you look at the edit, we don't know that they didn't go into the Old Forest. We don't know that they didn't meet Tom.
No, but we know the Scouring didn't happen. When they get back to the Shire, nothing has changed. Or maybe some things have changed, but I sure couldn't tell.
It was intended for it to have been not quite as it was when they first left.
The way it's presented looks like nothing has changed. Old Proudfoot is still sweeping, just as distrustful as ever. It's a cute joke, but I think it fundamentally undermines one of the main themes of the story.
And I think Tolkien perhaps makes the point that the Shire isn't invulnerable. It just thinks it is. But it too should actually bear some part of the pain and the casualties of Middle-earth.
By showing nothing has changed, the idea comes across that if the hobbits hadn't gone on their adventure, they would have been alright, happily oblivious to the goings-on of the outside world. The fight would never come to their doorstep, and that just goes against a core theme of the book and the movie. The Shire is not some eternally safe, protected bubble of Middle-earth just because no trouble has come there yet. I mean, it is protected by the Dunedain, and when they all went away fighting Mordor, it made it easy for Sharky to slip in, but it's not just naturally safe. It takes work to keep evil out of the Shire, and it's not so impossible for evil to slip in. The ending just makes it seem like the Shire was never really at that great of a risk. Now granted, maybe I'm misreading the gag. Maybe the point isn't the Shire would have remained ignorant of the outer world forever. Maybe the point of the gag is, boy, that sure was a close call. They don't know how close they were to getting taken over. Had the Fellowship not intervened, this blissful ignorance would have been threatened.
It is what will come to pass if you should fail.
But I still don't think that comes across particularly well. And it's just not as effective as actually showing the Shire affected. So if you're not going to show the Shire be affected, I would rather you just not show the moment they return to the Shire at all, so I can at least pretend that this all happened off screen. And the number one reason the movie screwed up in how they eliminated the Scouring of the Shire, okay, fine, I understand why you cut it, but why did you spend so much time setting it up? I can accept that having this extended bonus climax after the purported goal of the trilogy might have felt like odd pacing for a blockbuster movie to the average audience member. So why did they leave in so much of the setup for the Scouring? There's a lot of foreshadowing to the Shire being threatened. A lot!
Fires of Isengard will spread, and the woods of Tuckborough and Buckland will burn, and all that was once green and good in this world will be gone. There won't be a Shire, Pippin.
And all of that feels undermined by the aforementioned unchanged Shire the Hobbits come home to. On top of which, they really, really amped up Saruman's role in the story. Arguably, the first two movies build him up as more of the main villain than Sauron.
Of course, what we did is we elevated Saruman, in a sense, to the villainry role, and kept the Eye relatively a minor player.
Some obstacles are caused by Saruman in the movie that aren't really said to have anything to do with him in the book, like the Pass of Caradhras. In the book, the implication is just that the mountain itself is mad at them for daring to cross. Gimli claims the cruelty of Caradhras predates even knowledge of Sauron. But in the movie...
There is a fell voice on the air.
No, dude, I think that avalanche was just caused by you yelling. Saruman's role is spruced up throughout the film. His first in-person appearance in the book doesn't happen until everyone confronts him at Isengard, a scene ironically that doesn't even make it into the theatrical cut of the film. Every one of the many appearances he makes before that are either relayed by Gandalf or just hinted at happening elsewhere. So with the amount they built him up, you would think defeating him would be the climax of the trilogy. Instead, they take a few elements from his defeat at the end of the Scouring, put it in the Isengard scene, and relegate it to the extended editions. If you were gonna leave Saruman's defeat for the extended editions anyway, you could have extended it all the way to the Scouring. Yes, I realize there's a difference between doing a few additional scenes for a DVD and doing essentially a television episode's worth of story for the DVD, but come on! They even leave in the fact that Saruman has business dealings with the Shire.
Can't be. It has long-bottom leaf.
This sets up his role as Sharky, a role that is never once followed up on. This was the first time we were getting a complete Lord of the Rings movie trilogy. We finally had opportunity for a film to pay off all its setups, and then it doesn't? What a wildly unsatisfying thing to happen in what was otherwise a very satisfying film-going experience. And those are my biggest issues with Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. And I'm not trying to ruin the movie for anyone with these, because these don't even fully ruin the movie for me. They just mean I have to separate the movie from the books as two separate but overlapping things I enjoy. As Roger Ebert said in his review of Fellowship, that Fellowship of the Ring doesn't match my imaginary vision of Middle-earth is my problem, not yours. And it's true. I love that Peter Jackson was able to bring his vision of the War of the Ring to the big screen, and I kinda hope he's not the last to do so. I would love to see more Lord of the Rings adaptations with different takes. Not just that Amazon show that's happening, but more versions of this story specifically.
In even more time, people will get to see the book in its own original light again, and perhaps one day someone might make a new version of it, who knows.
Because after all, Jackson's cinematic vision for Middle-earth may loom largest right now, but before he came along, there was another vision that the fans could experience. Well, two other visions that were packaged as one, and we'll talk about those next week. But in the meantime, do you have nitpicks about these movies, or do you just want me to shut up and stop whining and enjoy the films? Let's discuss this all in the comments, and until next week, this is Dave, signing off. Hey everyone, Dave here, and welcome back to Tolkien Adaptation Month, where right now I am preoccupied with the Tolkien animated trilogy?
Dave's obsession of the moment.
Yes, long before Peter Jackson brought Middle-earth to the big screen, this was the movie trilogy we had to work with. A movie trilogy that was never supposed to be, and ultimately doesn't work as a trilogy, for reasons that aren't necessarily the fault of any individual entry, although they all have their peculiar issues too. But many Tolkien fans have a fondness for one, if not all of these cartoons, myself included. But their legacy is complicated. Now, Tolkien never lived to see any of these films, and it's frankly impossible to gauge what he would have thought of them, but we know a little bit about what he might think of animated movies based on his work in general. Kind of. In his life, Tolkien seemed to be of multiple minds regarding potential filmed adaptations altogether, but especially animated adaptations. In general, he was open to a filmed adaptation, but he was not convinced it could actually work. As for animation specifically, in a 1957 letter, number 198 in the Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien collection, Tolkien wrote, "I should welcome the idea of an animated motion picture with all the risk of vulgarization." So, at least at that time, he was open to the idea of a cartoon, but fully prepared for it to be a disappointment. But later in the early 70s, when John Boorman was working on his never-produced version of the film, Boorman claims Tolkien was relieved that it would be live action, saying that he had a nightmare that it would be animated. Based on the other things I've heard about the Borman script, whether it was live action or animated should have been the least of Tolkien's worries. But that's a different story. The thing is, at the time, it made a lot of sense for these to be animated. The Hobbit was seen as a children's fantasy adventure tale, the likes of which Disney built an empire out of, and Lord of the Rings was seen as practically unfilmable, for two distinct reasons. Reason number one, the scale. And reason number two, the scale. By that I mean reason number one, the scale of the story, the scope, the grand overwhelming world of Middle-earth, full of massive armies and cities rich with their own history. And reason number two, the physical scale of the different characters of Middle-earth. The diminutive hobbits and dwarves alongside the larger-than-life elves, wizards, and Dunedain. With animation, you don't have the limitations of live action. You can draw characters of any shape and size, and as many of them as you need, and put them in any exotic locale you can imagine. Let's put a pin in that thought, and for now, let's look at these movies individually, starting with Rankin Bass's The Hobbit.
The greatest adventure is there if you're bold. Let go of the mold that life makes you whole.
Based on the original version of The Hobbit, did they forget the word book? The Hobbit might seem an odd choice of adaptation for the company that was mostly known for Christmas specials, especially when Tolkien himself wrote a separate Christmas mythology, but that had only just been published and it wasn't in the public domain. The Hobbit was, at the time, in the US only, due to a screw-up from publishers. I have mixed feelings about that because as much as I support the public domain, I think it's unfair when an author's ownership over their work is taken from them because somebody else did something dumb. But the weird loophole that placed the books in the public domain was closed later, so the books are no longer in the public domain in the US, which I have even more complicated feelings about. Like, yeah, the circumstances that place him in the public domain were unfair, but the precedent that things can be taken out of the public domain is really unsettling. Why yes, as a matter of fact, it is a constant struggle to reconcile my love of the public domain with my love of Disney stuff. Why do you ask? But complicated circumstances aside, the fact is, at the time, The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings were in the public domain in the US, but not internationally. So for an adaptation that the Tolkien estate didn't authorize, a big theatrical film that wouldn't be able to play overseas was probably not the best call. So instead, this was a made-for-TV special aired on NBC, but with plans to release it to theaters locally if the ratings were good enough. While the special definitely has a lot of the hallmarks of cheap television animation, with a $3 million budget, it was actually the most expensive television production in history at the time. Guess it's just really hard to do an affordable version of Middle-earth no matter what you do. The character designs are something alright. They made a point of being true to any physical descriptions in the book, but that still gave them a lot of freedom to do this to Bilbo. You know, make him look like a cross between a Keebler elf and E.T. But hey, on some of the posters, his design is even worse. God, giant albino bullfrog! Maybe that's not Bilbo, maybe it's actually Smeagol, and that's why Gollum looks so amphibious. Still, no design in this special is uglier than the Wood Elves. Good God! I hope Legolas takes after his mom's side of the family. I guess they just really wanted to distinguish themselves from the elves they were already known for. Nobody's gonna mistake these guys for Hermie. But despite a few questionable character design choices, I really love the background arc, which is all like kinda realistic, but kinda stylized and completely beautiful. And it's no wonder considering the things the overseas animators responsible for this film would go on to do. As for some of the other stylistic choices, I keep going back and forth on that spiraling out thing characters do when they get killed. I can never decide if I love it or hate it. I don't know. What do you think? Let's talk. As for the writing, it's rushed. The characters mostly get reduced to the broadest archetypical versions of their characters from the book. Bilbo is fussy.
Dwarves have a strange notion of perfection.
Thorin is grumpy.
A splendid lucky number you found for us.
Bombur is fat.
And, Bombur at your service.
The rest of the dwarves are there too.
Mr. Baggins. Bilbo.
And Gandalf just seems mysterious for mysterious' sake in a way that's just unhelpful. Like, okay, much has been written about how the Gandalf of the Hobbit is more of a general mysterious old wizard trope than his more complex and grounded portrayal in Lord of the Rings. But reading The Hobbit, I still got the sense that he's, like, a character whose actions are motivated, even if the motivations are sometimes unclear to Bilbo and the dwarves. In this movie, not so much.
If the secret door is hidden, how do we find it? The map doesn't tell.
It does, and it doesn't.
Huh?
You will understand in time.
Dude, if you don't know, you can just say that. And then when he's not being vague, it seems like he only cares about furthering Bilbo's development. Like he's making big moves for the sole purpose of Bilbo's self-actualization. Like he's some sort of manic wizard dream Gandalf.
Now, I am already late because of bothering with you people. I am sending Mr. Baggins with you. That should be enough.
The burglar?
Me? I'm no equal to a wizard.
Nonsense. You are the lucky number. And soon you'll find out there's more about you than you guess. You don't really suppose, do you, that all your adventures and escapes were managed by mere luck? Just for your sole benefit?
No, he believes that you orchestrated everything just for his sole benefit. You made choices just because they would drive his arc, not because you have anything else going on in Middle-earth. Also, Gandalf seems to know the whole time that Bilbo has a magic ring.
Your story, Bilbo, has the ring of truth. Yes, it rings true.
Okay, fair. In the book, Bilbo did wonder if Gandalf guessed the part he let out, and I think that's a fun way of adapting that note. But Gandalf seems to know already that it's the One Ring?
Oh, Bilbo Baggins, if you really understood that ring, someday members of your family not yet born will, then you'd realize that this story has not ended, but is only beginning.
You are uncharacteristically chill about that. I guess having the most evil item in the universe resurface is just, cute and quirky as long as it can teach Bilbo another lesson. So with the writing so rushed, most of the characterization is left to the voice actors, and to the movie's credit, there is a murderer's row of comedians and voice talent from the era. If you can accept the fact that the denizens of Middle-earth have American accents. Orson Bean is solid as Bilbo. His fussiness comes across beautifully.
Eggs and bacon, a good full pipe, my garden at twilight, cakes.
When he's not being bogged down with wildly stilted dialogue.
I'm a quiver with anticipation.
And while it's kinda hard to accept anyone other than Andy Serkis in the role anymore, I think Brother Theodore is a pretty good Gollum.
Is it nice, my precious? Is it juicy, gooey, yucky? Is it scrumptious?
And Hans Conried as Thorin Oakenshield is inspired. Who better to capture a cartoonified version of the Dwarf King's indignance and greed than Captain Hook?
Curses to the dragon! Curses to Smaug! He killed our men and stole our gold!
And another Captain Hook, Cyril Richard, plays Elrond. Sadly, he passed away only a few weeks after this production aired, so this was his final role, but while it's brief, he plays it well.
Yes, of course. Well, first of all, they're not troll-make. They must have been stolen.
Paul Frees does a few additional voices, and Thurl Ravenscroft does some singing, and Dave Does Disney fans know how I feel about that wonderful combination. As for Gandalf, you're always going to need someone with real gravitas. But this is just a made-for-TV cartoon, so I'm afraid that all we can get is John Huston!
And so, tomorrow begins your greatest adventure.
Yeah, Hollywood legend John Huston. The guy whose directorial debut was the Maltese freaking Falcon. The guy who played the evil creep in that movie directed by the other evil creep. And amazingly, this was not his only influence on a Tolkien adaptation, although the others were long after his death. He had a little bit of an influence on the Jackson movies.
Look at some John Huston. His tree beard without the fungus looks like John Huston a bit.
And one of my favorite Lord of the Rings parodies draws heavily from his work.
What is it, Gandalf?
It's the ring, Frodo. It must be taken and thrown into the fire in Mount Doom.
All right.
Of course, some characters are cut altogether, notably Beorn, and there are simplifications throughout the story, some of them really minor, like dropping the Durin's Day concept from the secret door, and some much bigger, like removing the Arkenstone. Okay, I fully understand why the Arkenstone thread seemed expendable in the name of condensing the story, but I do feel like it was one of the fatal errors here. Without that element, Bilbo and Thorin's argument at the end doesn't seem like a major betrayal on Bilbo's part, causing the friendship to rupture permanently. It just seems like more of the same squabbling they've been doing the whole time.
Wear it proudly, and it will carry you to victory.
Confusticate and be bother, victory. My only hope is to be taken prisoner as quickly as possible.
Those are the words of a coward.
The coward who always went forward while you cringed behind?
You don't see us cringing now, do you?
And when it just seems like more of the same, the deathbed reconciliation is far less meaningful.
Farewell, good thief. I wish to part in friendship.
And then there are other scenes that I have to assume were written but were deleted after the fact.
Run to the Wood Elves' clearing.
Never mind the fact that the audience never once saw us discover the Wood Elves' clearing, we just know about it. But what really makes me sad about the condensed writing is how much of the humor of the book really suffers, as Bilbo and Gandalf's good morning conversation is cut, as is the comic build of the dwarves slowly arriving and overwhelming poor Bilbo. Instead they go for mysterious and spooky.
Enough! I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me!
Gandalf? Not the wandering wizard.
We must away ere break of day.
Mysterious and spooky isn't a terrible choice of tone overall, but man do I miss the book's humor. In one case, they not only cut out the funny part of the book, but in doing so, they fundamentally changed what Gandalf's powers are. Rather than tricking the trolls into arguing with each other until sunrise, Gandalf just makes the sun come up.
Dawn take you all, and be stoned to you.
Man, that's a hell of a power. I knew you were the wielder of the Flame of Anor, but I didn't know you could control Anor. Did this happen because the screenwriter misunderstood the line, "The dawn comes early"?
How did the morning come so soon?
That's not to say the movie is without its own sense of humor. The movie's sense of humor seems to mostly involve Bilbo whining, which is hit or miss.
Thank you, but I'd appreciate a more pragmatic salute. In other words, extinguish me!
And Thorin using burgle as a verb, which gets old a little faster.
Burglar, do your burgling. Well, you are the burglar. Go down and burgle something. What did you burgle?
Burglar, madam.
That said, the ceasefire between the three armies as the goblins arrive is, well, it's hilarious. I'm assuming that it's trying to be a comedy beat.
Take their heads! Kill the men! Kill the elves! Oh, great elf king, my truest friend and ally, we must join our forces against this common scourge.
But of course, O noble king under the mountain, your people are like brothers unto mine.
Together!
Thorin is correct. I simply do not understand war.
A side effect of some of the rushing is giving Bilbo more agency in minor ways, such as having him directly tell the thrush to deliver the message to Bard, rather than the thrush just overhearing it and deciding to give the message to Bard.
You have seen Smaug. You know his vulnerable spot. Go now to Lake Town. There is a guardsman, Bard. Tell him.
Never mind how I know that you can talk to Bard, just go about it. And earlier than that, Bilbo actively chooses to ask Gollum what he has in his pocket, rather than accidentally asking it, which really sucks. Like, Bilbo accidentally stumbling into asking a non-riddle, and that being what ends up saving him, that is funny stuff, and it's true to his character. But Bilbo deliberately asking a non-riddle in a riddles game?
What have I got in my pocket?
Not fair! Not fair to us, my precious, what it's got in its nasty little pocket is this?
I'm sorry, that's my riddle. And if you can't guess it, you lose.
That sucks! You're a no-good cheater, Baggins! They also remove the moment where Bilbo almost kills Gollum after that. They just have Bilbo run away without trying to kill him.
Ta-ta!
I presume they changed that to keep the story kid-friendly, but I feel like we lose a lot there. The pity that stays Bilbo's hand is one of the most pivotal moments in the history of Middle-earth. The fact that Bilbo chose mercy may not make much of a difference in this story specifically, but it changes everything that follows, and it's hard to feel like an authentic Middle-earth adaptation without that moment. Also, this is definitely the revised version of Riddles in the Dark, so the opening credits really had no business saying based on the original version.
Dragons! We hate it! Hate it! Forever!
Look, I know, changing things is just a natural element of adaptation, and trimming things for time, I may not agree with every change, but I at least understand why they do it. And then there are some changes here that I can't even necessarily say they're bad. I just don't know why they made these changes.
Well, first of all, they're not troll make.
Why does Elrond have a beard? Even half-elves aren't exactly known for their beards.
There are moon letters here.
Those aren't the moon letters. Those are the runes that say 5 feet high the door and 3 may walk abreast. The script knew this because Bilbo referenced them earlier despite them not being visible.
This hand points from these runes.
Yep, I see these runes, these very runes, look at them. That ring is way more ornate than the ring as described in the book. It's got, like, designs and stuff on it.
There are moments which can change a person for all time. And I suddenly wondered if I would ever see my snug hobbit hole again. I wondered if I actually wanted to.
That is not the attitude Bilbo had climbing the tree in the book. You left the cells unlocked when you freed the dwarves from the Wood Elves' dungeon? You didn't lock the doors and return the keys so they would think the dwarves have a very strong magic to pass through all those locked doors and disappear? I mean, I guess I get it as visual shorthand for they're all free now, but huh.
Sorry you could not find me, but a fine burglar takes expert catching.
Burglar?
Bilbo, why did you show yourself to Smaug? Even in all your growth and newfound bravery, would you really be that cocky?
A battle of 4 armies. 1, 2, 3, yes, 4.
No, it's already 5 armies. The book counts the wargs as a second army separate from the goblins.
The Eagles! 5 armies now?
Actually, no, the Eagles do not count as an army. I don't make the rules, take it up with Johnny Ronnie.
What happened?
We won.
Bomber gone, too.
Bomber died? He didn't die in the book. He lived on so that Tolkien could take some time out of Lord of the Rings Book 2, Chapter 1, many meetings to further fat-shame him. Bomber was now so fat that he could not move himself from his couch to his chair at table, and it took 6 young dwarves to lift him. I'm not saying I want to keep the fat-shaming, I'm just saying, why did you kill Bomber?
Of our original 13, how many are left?
7.
Only Feely and Keely died in the battle. Wait, did you get that 7 number from the aforementioned many meetings, where Glowin says that only 7 of the original company remain? Because again, he specifically mentions Bomber as one of the remaining 7. Dwalin, Glowin, Dory, Nori, Beefer, Boffer, and Bomber.
And Thorin?
Soon there will be only 6.
Your 7 living included Thorin? You're killing more dwarves in one battle than Tolkien killed over 77 years? Man, Rankin Bass Productions just has some real dwarf bloodlust. I guess I shouldn't be surprised that they're Team Elf after all. So after discussing what this production removes and changes from the book, what does it add to the book? Well, mostly songs. Or that is, mostly music for the songs that are already in the book. There is one brand new song, the theme song The Greatest Adventure, sung by Glenn Yarborough, and yeah, I have a fondness for this, even if I think the sentiment is kinda simplistic, even for this story, but it has a charm that I can't deny.
Greatest adventure is what lies ahead.
The rest of the songs have lyrics adapted by Jules Bass from Tolkien's original poetry, with music by Maury Laws. Most of the lyrical adaptation comes in the form of abridgment, although for In the Valley, they straight up changed the stanza structure. The line, "and Balin and Dwalin down into the valley in June, haha," gets changed to "and Balin and Dwalin in June."
My dear Elrond, your hospitality is magnificent.
Now I know what you're thinking right now, but what does that mean for the later stanza they were setting up a rhyme for? "And listen and hark till the end of the dark to our tune, haha." Oh, they just cut that stanza. So, solutions. Moving on from elves singing, I have to note that Tolkien describes the goblins singing as croaking, and that their songs sound truly terrifying and horrible. He paints the picture of a very unpleasant experience listening to the goblins sing about whipping and cracking. So naturally, the good people at Rankin Bass Productions decided to turn the goblin songs into absolute freaking jams.
You go my land, 15 birds in 5 fir trees, their feathers were fanned in a fiery breeze.
These are the catchiest songs in the whole thing. They are awesome, they rock, they are completely tonally inappropriate for their places in the story, but I love them.
Ask him to explain his weapon. This sword is named Orcrist, the Goblin Cleaver.
Murderers! Elf friends!
I do love how the goblins have squeaky speaking voices, but beautiful, rich, deep singing voices. Thurl paved the way for the latter-day career of Robert Goulet. The soundtrack album also includes a song that didn't make it into the film, Bilbo's taunting of the Mirkwood Spiders.
Hey, Addercop, you can't catch anybody.
I'd be curious to see how this would have been integrated into the animation, assuming that was ever the plan. Thing is, I've never been able to find a whole lot of behind-the-scenes info on the movie, which made it all the more fascinating to me when at a used bookstore, my family found this, a 1989 illustrated version of The Hobbit using illustrations from the Rankin Bass film. Appropriately enough, a literal Red Book of Westmarch, although I'm sure it originally had a slipcover. But this is the unabridged text of the original book, featuring not only screenshots from the cartoon, but also concept art. So you get some slightly different character designs and some different colors, a shockingly high number of drawings of a green version of Smaug, and at one point in development, apparently the ring had a diamond on it, which would have been just plain sacrilegious. But there are also illustrations of some scenes that didn't make it into the movie. There's exactly one drawing of Beorn in human form, one drawing in bear form, and a drawing of the gruesome fate of his victims. There's an illustration of the Arkenstone, and of Bilbo's meeting with Bard and Thranduil to hand it over. So were all these scenes animated and deleted? Or did they just make it to the concept art stage? Or were they never going to be in the movie and these were just drawn in the movie style for this book? I have no idea. But it's an interesting peek at what a more complete take on the story from this team might look like. I have a lot of fondness for this movie, but I don't think it does justice to the book. If The Hobbit was just another children's book, and this was just one of many adaptations of it, this would be fine. It's like, I don't know, Chuck Jones' version of The Cricket in Times Square. A cute cartoon based on a book you kinda remember reading as a kid. Unless your favorite book actually is Cricket in Times Square, in which case I apologize. Point is, I feel like if The Hobbit was just a standalone book, if this had been released before Lord of the Rings was written, this would feel a lot more serviceable than I find it right now. But the only real authorized theatrical feature film to come from Tolkien's work until Jackson came along is Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings. Now, this movie has been examined all over the internet many times over. Decades ago, the Tolkien Sarcasm page posted a particularly snarky, nitpicky recap that is harsher on the film than I would be, but it does still make me laugh. And more recently, Dan Olson did a more charitable look at the film with a more thorough look at the context of the production. So, yeah. Tolkien fans are divided on this movie. Even among the cast and crew of the live-action movies, opinions towards this movie differ.
My first introduction to The Lord of the Rings was when I saw the Ralph Bakshi cartoon film in 1978. There is one shot which I regard as my homage to the cartoon, because it did inspire me to want to read the book.
Have you talked about the Bakshi version, the Ralph Bakshi version of Lord of the Rings from the 1970s?
Yeah, here and there.
But it was mostly terrible. It was mostly really, really, really awful.
So, since this movie has been thoroughly examined from seemingly every angle, all I can do is express my personal feelings about this movie. Did I grow up loving it, just grateful to have any adaptation of Fellowship? Or did I grow up hating it and waiting desperately for something better to come along? The answer is neither. I didn't see this movie as a kid. I really wanted to, but I could never track a copy down for myself. Like, it was available, it was around, it wasn't out of print or anything. But back then, if your local Blockbuster didn't have a movie in stock, it was not so easy to get your hands on. I really wanted to see this as a kid. I saw both the Rankin Bass movies, and I wanted the trilogy to be complete. But the most I saw of this as a kid was the clips used as the opening cutscene of Interplay's Lord of the Rings computer game. I was intrigued to see more, although I was confused as to why the art style looks so different from the other movies in the trilogy. I had no idea. But eventually, long after the Jackson movies came out, my local Blockbuster finally obtained a copy of Bakshi's Lord of the Rings. So I finally got to see it, and I've seen it many times since then. And my feelings about this movie? I love that it exists. I don't know if I love watching the movie itself. There are certainly parts I love about it, and I really admire its ambition, but I have a lot of respect for this movie. And I think I love it as an oddity, as a peculiar piece of Tolkien history and animation history. I think for the most part, its heart is in the right place. But I also think a lot about this film is misguided. The thing that drew Bakshi to Lord of the Rings was the realism it had for a fantasy story.
I mean, it was probably the greatest fantasy for realism. Tolkien is so brilliant, so great. Here's a totally believable world he put together. You know, every page, detail on what they're eating and how they look and how they feel. I've never read anything like it in my whole life to this date.
So he wanted to honor that realism by making the most realistic-looking animation he could manage. Hence this movie's extensive use of rotoscoping.
And you produce photographs from the live action frame by frame. If you put these photographs on an animator's desk and have him draw over the photographs, you now have a pencil drawing of the drawn photograph.
And remember how I said that the advantage to doing Lord of the Rings as an animated movie is solving the problem of scale and scale? Unfortunately, the rotoscoped animation sticks a little too close to the live-action source footage, so the result is a movie with uncommonly small armies, an uncommonly tall dwarf, and an uncommonly short Balrog. There are other interesting visual stylistic choices, particularly in the backgrounds in some sequences, which I don't think is necessarily a bad choice. It helps convey the fears the characters are feeling, but I think it's odd that Bakshi talked a big game about being so concerned with the realism of the story, and then went and added so many deliberately unrealistic visuals. 1 minute Middle-earth is being brought to life in beautiful detail, the next minute we're in an endless void of vague color. And sometimes they don't go with rotoscoping so much as solarization, and I don't want to diminish how much work things took back then, but by 1998, a camcorder you got at Costco could do this effect with the push of a button. And no matter how much work you put into it, you can never hide the fact that this is clearly mostly live-action footage in the middle of your animated movie, and the other characters are clearly drawn and just Roger Rabbited in. Or, since this is Bakshi, I guess Cool Worlded in. The effect can be off-putting, but there is one place where I think this effect actually works really well for the story, and that is the Prancing Pony. It allows them to include the party atmosphere of the Bree of the book, while still making the hobbits look just as out of place and unwelcome as they feel in the Jackson version. This is the place where I think the stylistic choice works best in service of the story and the tone. The rotoscoping has some interesting results, but ultimately this project is an ambitious filmmaker using experimental techniques for a Tolkien adaptation that doesn't necessarily benefit from those techniques. Fortunately, that would never happen again. For his part, Bakshi later expressed regret at how close the rotoscoping stayed to the source footage. Still, Bakshi was ahead of his time with the use of rotoscoping. Using live-action reference to guide the animation, that's like the biggest thing Jackson's Two Towers was praised for. Unfortunately, this production was also ahead of its time in creating a crunch culture.
We were working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. We'd literally leave at 8 at night when it was getting dark and say, okay, I'll see you at sunrise. And you'd come back the next day and you'd work and you'd work and you'd drink coffee.
And a lot of people throwing things away, not good, throwing things away.
Hobbit hair. I got fired once because somebody did a lousy job on Hobbit hair.
You know, the production of the Jackson movies was definitely arduous, but the DVD features at least create the impression that everyone was happy to be there, even if times got hard. The DVD for the animated version of Lord of the Rings makes the entire experience of working on the film sound absolutely miserable. And nobody seemed more miserable about it than Bakshi himself.
You know, the amount of work to produce Rings, the frames, the people, shooting live action and animation. I mean, I don't think anyone ever appreciated I was on the verge of insanity.
But there was so much real talent on this film. So much of Bakshi's reputation was built on his movies being adult cartoons, not like Disney cartoons. So it's kind of hilarious that the rotoscope reference for Frodo was an original Mouseketeer, and the rotoscope reference for Sam and Bilbo would go on to be the original Figment. As for the voice cast, it's all great British theater actors. The most famous is John Hurt as Aragorn.
Here is the sword of Elendil of Gondor, who fought the Dark Lord long ago and was slain.
The most surprising is Anthony Daniels in a rare non-3PO role as Legolas.
What a people you dwarves are for hiding things. On the gates of your most wondrous ancient kingdom you write, "Speak, friend, and enter." And no spell in any language can open the door.
And on a sad note, Elrond is played by Andre Morel, who passed away just a few weeks after this was released. Is animated Elrond just a cursed role? As an adaptation, it's mostly a straightforward adaptation. Obviously, things get shuffled around and condensed, as they do in all adaptations. Very few things are created out of whole cloth for this one, but as is usually the case in Tolkien adaptations, characters get conflated.
Legolas!
Okay. Glorfindel? Everything all right?
Oh, he's been pissed about this longer than the rest of us. He's still mad about the cartoon.
Look, I'm not upset about getting replaced by Arwen in the movies. I get it. She's great. She's the freaking even star, and she's the big romantic lead, so let's increase her role. Fine. Arwen's great.
Yeah, everyone loves our little sister. Oh, hush.
But the stupid cartoon replaces me with Legolas, a freaking wood elf. Do you think that all elven subcultures are just interchangeable, Bakshi? You can't just go and replace a Noldor with a Sindar willy-nilly. The only reason he was in Rivendell was to apologize because he lost Gollum. But sure, give him my role. I died in the First Age and was resurrected. But sure, let the trust fund kid from Mirkwood take over. God, just give all my glory to the guy who already happens to be in the story.
Hey, at least you weren't replaced by the same guy twice.
I will find Éomer and his riders.
At one point, Bakshi wanted to do a full trilogy, but he couldn't figure out how to make the second film work. Little did he know that the way to make the second film work is apparently just to completely screw up Faramir and Treebeard. For a while, there was also interest in Bakshi doing The Hobbit as well, which may have been stopped directly because of the Rankin Bass Hobbit, leading Bakshi to publicly mock Rankin Bass Productions, claiming that his Tolkien movie is not going to have any song for the sake of a record album. But, you know there are songs in Lord of the Rings, right? It's not just to sell soundtracks, it's actually part of the book. You do know this because you did include one of the songs in your movie, even if you didn't include it on the soundtrack album.
There is an inn, a merry old inn, beneath an old grey hill.
Ultimately, it was decided that there would be 2 films, and then there was only one. This is not the fault of the adapters, but it does kind of make the film suffer as setups are introduced without payoff, leaving it impossible to really judge their effectiveness as setups. Many people have talked about how annoying this take on Samwise is, and I really wish we could have seen him actually come into his own at the end of the story to see if this particularly squealy Sam was an effective setup for his arc. Alas, we'll never know. Also, there are plenty of things to nitpick about the adaptation, like the fact that as much as Bakshi bragged about staying true to the book, he'd occasionally subvert a detail. Nothing that, fundamentally changed the functions of the story, like some of the Rankin Bass changes, just little things like how the text deliberately notes that the doors of Durin swing outward. That is such a small nitpick. It is not important to the story or anything. It's just another of those things where I can't imagine why it was changed. Especially since the change makes the Watcher in the water shutting them in look a little clunkier than it would if he was slamming the door in on them from the outside. More prominently, there are some interesting pronunciations in this. I'm not really in a position to judge because I am sure I've been saying so many character names wrong, but then again, I'm just one dork and not a guy with a production team who can take the time to memorize the pronunciation guides in the appendices. One odd pronunciation choice is pretty infamous, the fact that it was decided to change Saruman's name to Ahriman to make it less confusing with Sauron, but that decision is only used in half of the final film.
I have come for your aid, Saruman the White. That would take the ring too close to Isengard and Aruman.
And there are other odd or just plain incorrect pronunciations that pop up here and there.
And this is my lord Celeborn.
You come with me to Adoras, my friends?
If Saruman strikes now, he will overrun Adoras in a single night.
I know the language of Middle-earth is important because, well, the languages are the reason there is a Middle-earth, but in the grand scheme of storytelling, the pronunciations are nitpicks. The biggest problem with this movie is it's incomplete. And we'll never know if the completion would have been satisfying because Part 2 never happened. There's a lot of hearsay about why Part 2 never happened, but one of the rumors is that Bakshi walked away specifically because he was mad that they dropped Part 1 from the title and tricked audiences into seeing an incomplete film. The studios were concerned nobody would pay money to see a Part 1 because they'd think it's just half a movie. This was a simpler time in Hollywood. If that is the reason Bakshi walked away, it might be counterintuitive that your revenge for the studio tricking your audience into not knowing the film was incomplete is to never complete the film. I don't know. I don't think the problems with this film, either on screen or behind the scenes, can be blamed on any one person. I don't think this is fully a case of Bakshi ruining the text, nor do I think it's fully a case of those meddling studio heads ruining his vision that would have been perfect if they just gave him free range. I think Bakshi genuinely wanted to do right by Tolkien, and I think he did in a lot of aspects. And then misplaced ambitions sometimes got in the way. I think all of the cast and crew tried their hardest to make the best Lord of the Rings film they could within their limitations, and a confused studio made those limitations even harder than they needed to be. I think ultimately this just turned out to be a more difficult task than expected. But if nothing else, this movie proved that Lord of the Rings wasn't entirely unfilmable, as it had so long been believed. So I will always be grateful to it for that, if nothing else. Without this, we wouldn't have the Jackson trilogy, we wouldn't have any of Lord of the Rings' current resurgence in pop culture. This movie saved Lord of the Rings, you could say, or at the very least, made it possible for it to become mainstream. Bakshi is retired from animation, and he has often said that even if he goes back into it, he's done with adapting other people's work. But as recently as 2018, he said that if the studio wants to conclude his version of Lord of the Rings, he'd be happy to consult. And you know what? I say go for it. Just do it, Warner Brothers. If you can have 18 concurrent unrelated Batman movie franchises, you can have 3 versions of Return of the King. Hashtag release the Bakshi cut. And speaking of Return of the King, let's talk about Rankin Bass's Return of the King.
You won't have to say goodbye.
Oh, now they remember the ring is supposed to look plain. The other movies in this trilogy have their fans, but generally this is the black sheep of the animated Tolkien adaptations. Even the filmmakers weren't particularly happy with how it turned out.
Put all that material into a film is very, very difficult. And we found that, not with The Hobbit. The Hobbit worked, because it's a simpler story. But The Return of the King, we had to summarize what had happened before and put it all together in 2 hours. It's not a very good film.
The fact that it even exists is baffling enough. It's a common misconception that Rankin Bass stepped in to finish the trilogy when it became clear Bakshi's sequel wouldn't happen, tying up the loose ends just so there would be a conclusion. And even ignoring the difference in character designs and voices, it doesn't really tie up those loose ends. Not only does Treebeard completely disappear, but Gimli and Legolas too, although given how they drew Legolas' dad, that's probably just as well. Saruman and Wormtongue also disappear, although that's just a trend in non-extended editions. We never see Merry and Pippin reunite with Gandalf, nor do we see Aragorn leave Gandalf. He's just returning from somewhere. Also, Frodo just has the Phial of Galadriel. We never see him get it in the Bakshi movie, and apparently its magic only works by keeping the star a secret.
The Phial of Galadriel. I can say no more. But if I betray the trust and give the secret, its powers will die.
Okay. And then some characters just never show up in either movie. There's no Shelob, for instance. We just have to assume that the trap Gollum was leading Frodo and Sam to was just these orcs.
She might help us.
And there's no Faramir unless this dude next to Éowyn at the end is Faramir. Or maybe it's Éomer? Or maybe Erkenbrand, Baragond, Imrahil? There's no way of knowing. So if this was made to tie up Bakshi's Lord of the Rings, it does not succeed in that mission. But here's the thing. It wasn't made to tie up Bakshi's Lord of the Rings. The phrase Lord of the Rings isn't even used in the title, or even in that weird based on the original version credit.
Not the one with the hills and beds.
The truth is, Rankin Bass's plan was always to just make two movies, The Hobbit and The Hobbit 2, The Return of the King, or The Hobbit 2, Frodo, as was also considered as a title. They began working on their Return of the King before their Hobbit was even released. I can't believe that by never seeing the Bakshi movie as a kid, I was watching these as Rankin Bass intended.
Why did you, just out of curiosity, go straight to The Return of the King instead of parts 1 and 2 of that trilogy, the Lord of the Rings trilogy?
I didn't know that we could handle it. I didn't know the audience would sit still for it. I was wrong.
So you thought that just telling one story and then the very end of a kind of related story was the solution? I'm going to apologize to Beauty and the Beast live on stage. I take back everything I said about A Series of Strange Circumstances. So this isn't a conclusion to an epic trilogy. It's just a sequel to The Hobbit. The result is a Tolkien adaptation that has less in common with its own source material than it does with the earlier adaptation of a related but very different piece of source material. Fortunately, that would never happen again! Sure, the movie doesn't make a whole lot of sense as a conclusion to a trilogy it never meant to conclude, but it makes even less sense as the standalone sequel to The Hobbit it actually was meant to be. We just start with this shot of Mount Doom, which is totally different from the Lonely Mountain, and Gandalf tells you that a story's happening.
Hear you now, a story of good against evil.
Then it's Bilbo's birthday in Rivendell, and we're going to tell Bilbo the story, but not the whole story, just the part that starts with Return of the King.
But why destroy a thing of such wondrous magic?
It was an evil thing, sir.
Just trust us, the ring was evil. We don't need any more details about what was evil about it, and never you mind that Gandalf was cavalier about its true nature earlier, and now we're in Mordor. A lot happened off screen. Just catch up yourselves. Everyone talks a lot about how King Aragorn is going to return, and it makes him come off like a mysteriously missing king of old, someone who disappeared ages ago, and generations have been awaiting his return in a Christ-like fashion, which I guess is kind of accurate. But it does not get across the fact that he was just hanging out with Frodo not long ago. Also, they leave in Gollum calling Frodo master, but they do not leave in any of the setup for that relationship.
Wicked master.
Odd choices all around. Being a sequel to The Hobbit, this naturally focuses on the Hobbits. Like, look at this cover for one of the later VHS releases of the movie. It makes it look like Frodo is the titular king. Also, it makes it look like dwarves are in this movie. There are no dwarves in this movie. Not even in the flashbacks to The Hobbit. In fact, despite the fact that I saw this movie many times as a kid, before revisiting it for the series, I could not remember if Aragorn is even in this. The titular king made very little impact in Return of the King.
In a distant land, the noble Aragorn, heir to the empty throne of Gondor, awaited with a small band to return and become king. But he could not triumph until the ring was destroyed.
Oh, okay, there he is. That's why I couldn't remember. I was getting him mixed up with Hanna-Barbera's version of King Saul. Wrong Greatest Adventure. Houston and Theodore return as Gandalf and Gollum, as well as Orson Bean as not only Bilbo, but also Frodo. Paul III steps in for Elrond, and he didn't die until 6 years later, so I think he broke the animated Elrond curse. The apparently forgettable titular King Aragorn is played by Theodore Bikel, making his scenes with Gandalf kind of an African Queen reunion? Nellie Bellflower plays Éowyn, the first female Tolkien character Rankin Bass animated. Seriously, even all the extras in Lake Town were male. What's with that? Oh, wait, no, I'm wrong. She's the second female character, if you count Rosie Cotton, in this fantasy sequence Sam has about settling down earlier in the movie. Fourth, if you count the daughters in that same fantasy sequence. Speaking of Samwise, he's Roddy McDowall, and if you liked him talking to himself on the phone in The Cat from Outer Space, you'll love him talking to himself walking through Mordor.
Fighting among themselves? Oh, I could get in. They wouldn't notice me. The ring holds me back. True. Once the orcs saw me, they'd forget their own arguments for the head of an enemy. God help us!
I believe you mean Eru Iluvatar help us? At least I think so. I haven't read the Silmarillion, but that's what I'm told. Pippin is Sonny Melendez, and Merry is Casey Kasem. And with all due respect to Dominic Monaghan, I think that means that legally, live-action Merry should have been Matthew Lillard. And other animation mainstays joined the cast, including Don Messick, speaking of Scooby-Doo, as both Theoden and the Mouth of Sauron. And the Rocky and Bullwinkle narrator himself, William Conrad, plays a take on Denethor that makes me want to apologize to the live-action movie. I take back everything I said about that Denethor losing his dignity.
Nay, soon all shall be burned. The West has failed. It shall go up in a great fire, and all shall be ended. I have looked inside my palantir.
What is that?
Palantir, the stuff of wizards.
You would know that if anyone had animated Book 3, Chapter 11. And once again, the pronunciations are all over the place. Like, Bakshi at least made an effort with authenticity, it's just that some pronunciations slip through the cracks in the chaos of production. But with this movie, these are the people who mixed up the runes on Thror's map. I'm pretty sure they didn't even know there were pronunciation guides in the appendices.
Ah, you know the gates to the land of Mordor and your Dark Lord Sauron, Cirith Ungol.
Minus Tirith.
Gorath.
And yes, this thing is full of little changes that I have to imagine were in the service of making it more kid-friendly, not too scary. Merry and Pippin reunite happily during battle. Merry has no need for the Houses of Healing.
Hail, proud Merry!
Keep on going!
When Aragorn shows up, the armies of Mordor just run away.
Aragorn, he who would be our king, had returned, and the hosts of Mordor were seized with bewilderment, and they fled.
Ah, crap, Aragorn's here! What's the use of trying? And oddest of all, they keep Theoden's death, but they cut the Nazgul attacking him. Instead, how does he die?
The new morning was blotted from the sky, and the dark fell upon him.
No, Snowman, no!
And the dark force had claimed our savior. And what event, at just that moment, caused evil to enlist such power? Nothing here, surely, but in the bowels of Mount Doom.
I have come, but I do not choose to do now what I have come to do.
Frodo fucking killed Theoden! And then, of course, Éowyn does her thing.
No living man may hinder me!
But no living man am I. You look upon a woman. Éowyn am I.
Wait, there are women in this universe? This scene would have been really effective if we had ever met Éowyn before this, or seen the relationship between her and Theoden. As it stands, Merry has to fill us in on why this matters, and that just makes it awkward.
A woman? Éowyn? Tis Lord Theoden's niece. She wanted to ride with us, but he forbade.
She disguised as a knight and she came hither.
Uncle, I have avenged thee!
By killing the guy who did not kill you in this version! But as with all of these, there are things I like about this adaptation. I really appreciate that they were smart enough to make Sam the focus. They even give him the pity for Gollum that they neglected to give Bilbo.
How can I kill such a pitiful and cringing abomination? I have come to know the strain of bearing the ring for even a little while. But this miserable creature enslaved to it for years. Oh, curse you, you stinking thing! Be off! I don't trust you, not as far as I could kick you. But be off!
Sam is the POV character more often than not, and I feel like an even lesser production would have just shoved him into the sidekick role. It's not quite the bumbling Bakshi Sam coming into his own, but it is a Sam who has already come into his own and is determined to get the job done. I especially love that they included Sam's temptation by the ring.
I could claim you, ring. I would be Samwise the Strong!
It's such a brief moment in the book that it's easy to forget, and I don't mind when adaptations just eliminate the risk of Sam being corrupted, but I love when it's included. I love that Sam both is tempted and is able to resist the temptation. And I love how wholesome his dark evil fantasy is.
This orc-infested desert of nameless horrors, let it live for Samwise the Strong! Behold, the gardens of my delight!
Gardens everywhere! Mwahahaha! Incessant talking to himself aside, Roddy McDowall does such a good job as determined warrior Sam that I really wish we got to hear him do the beginning of the arc too. Hear him as nervous, scared gardener Sam. I just want one complete Samwise arc in a cartoon. Is that too much to ask? And of course, being a sequel to The Hobbit, there are songs. Problem is, there's less poetry in Return of the King than there is in The Hobbit or even Fellowship. So most of these songs are kind of made up out of whole cloth, although some are sort of inspired by lines of dialogue from the text. And with a few exceptions, these songs are largely forgettable. But they gave them an in-universe singer this time, and yes, he's Glenn Yarborough.
We have brought with us someone who has written a ballad about the adventures of Frodo, the minstrel of Gondor.
Frodo of the 9 fingers and the ring of doom.
Now, the lyrics of this song don't come from the book, but the existence of it does. Book 6, Chapter 4, there's a minstrel of Gondor singing about Frodo of the 9 fingers and the ring of doom. And yet, both Tolkien Gateway and One Wiki to Rule Them All claim this character only exists in the film. I know about a character from the book that the 2 most prominent Tolkien wikis don't. I should not be so smug about this because I'm sure I've been getting so many other details wrong. Anyway, in the book, the Minstrel of Gondor is in Gondor, which makes sense, but I guess he came all this way to Rivendell just to tell Bilbo the story because, well, what else is he gonna do? So he sings a song that's one of the few in this that I kinda like, even if the lyrics need work.
When Bilbo found that shiny ring in Gollum's cave of gloom, he never thought that it would turn into a ring of doom.
Well, in his defense, if a ring of doom had been a concept that was even on his radar, the possibility might have crossed his mind that the one in the Cave of Gloom would become one.
Frodo of the 9 fingers and the ring of doom. It started with a hobbit in Gollum's cave of gloom.
Boy, you were really proud of that rhyme, huh, Jules? As for the rest of the songs, well, there's the song that reprises whenever someone succumbs to the ring's temptation or is on the verge of doing so.
The bearer of the ring, the wearer of the ring, stands on the very brink of fame. The bearer of the ring, the wearer of the ring, the bearer of the ring,
the sharer of the ring, the scarer of the ring, Tom Lehrer of the ring. There's Less Can Be More during Sam's settling down fantasy, which musically is like an okay folk music B-side, but the lyrics are at least attempting to engage with Tolkien's themes of the value of simplicity.
Less can be more, and small can be beautiful. I don't want it all, just part of wonderful.
Or maybe it's just the production team trying to justify the simpler TV cartoon rather than a more complete adaptation. There's Leave Tomorrow Till It Comes, a song that seems counterintuitive at this urgent hour in the story.
Leave tomorrow till it comes. Sleep will ease your mind.
But it pairs with this wild dream sequence. So Frodo has some dreams in Fellowship that are usually left out of adaptations. Return of the King mentions uneasy dreaming, but it doesn't really give specifics, so this is pretty much made up out of whole cloth. Frodo dreams of a happier version of the quest where Mordor is lush, orcs are friendly, destroying the ring is simple but apparently still necessary even though there's no evil, and then Gandalf and Sam turn into orcs which are no longer friendly. It's a wild moment, but it is a pretty accurate representation of anxiety dreams. There's The Towers of the Teeth, a taunting song the forces of Mordor seem to be singing at Aragorn's men as they march toward the Black Gate.
If you win, then you will lose. Choice of evils yours to choose. Retreat. 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 Retreat.
Heads I win and tails you lose. Why do hobbits wear no shoes on feet? Retreat. 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 There's the victory song in the denouement, which isn't all that memorable, but I do like that it includes a reference to the Houses of Healing.
The end of the ring, the return of the king, he shall rule with a true healing hand.
Throughout the piece, there's a reprise of The Road Goes Ever, Ever On, which includes a verse about not trying.
It's so easy not to try. Let the world go drifting by. If you never say hello, you won't have to say goodbye.
I am not sure if it's in favor of giving up, or if it's saying, good for you, you made an effort, that takes work. Or maybe it's singing to the armies of Mordor that just immediately gave up when Aragorn showed up? I don't know, it's really hard to read, this one. Also, there's the best song in the whole movie.
Where there's a whip, there's a way.
All the Goblin songs, total jams. I don't care that the song is tonally inappropriate for this movie, this universe, this everything. I love this song. I love these orcs. Look at this Muppety orc captain with his wide mouth and a neck that looks like the perfect fit for Carol Spinney's arm. I love it all. And even though this scene makes me want to apologize to Disney's Robin Hood and take back everything I said about its reused animation, it is the best scene in the whole movie. Because it does three very interesting things that aren't in the book. First off, it humanizes the orcs way more than Tolkien ever did.
We don't wanna go to war today, but the Lord of the Lashes says, nay, nay, nay.
Yep, big mood. Second, it gives Sam even more agency as he actually fuels the fight that allows him and Frodo to escape.
And you call yourself an orc? You're right! Right! Kill him! Own them!
And third, it changes the battalion that they squabble with from other orcs to a battalion of men, which ties it thematically with the notion that the world of man is taking over, a theme that is pervasive in the book, and it's the theme that the movie really seems to double down on, even though I'm not entirely sure how it feels about that theme.
Consider no less than the cataclysmic transformation of that ancient world of wonder and magic to the world we know now, of man.
Especially at the end. Sure, they skip the scouring, but since they never show the return to the Shire, they don't outright deny that it was corrupted, so small victories. Bilbo announces that he's leaving Middle-earth tomorrow with Gandalf and Elrond, and Frodo decides he wants to come.
But I thought only elves departed thus. How can Bilbo join you?
Bilbo has served us well. There is always room for a friend.
Have I served thee well?
Need you ask such a question?
I have grown weary of this world. The weight of the ring all these years has worn me far beyond my age. I would, if it pleases you, set sail with you on the morrow.
This isn't exactly decided on a whim, mind you, since he had the thought of doing such a thing earlier in his adventure, but that was a passing fancy that he didn't exactly give much deliberation to.
And only elves can escape Middle-earth. They board the white ships at the Grey Havens and sail off to the lands beyond.
Roads go ever on.
He didn't even really think it would be possible for him to leave earlier. He was just like, that's a nice fantasy. Now he's just ready to go because he's weary and it's the age of man.
Will there be no room for hobbits in this new age of man?
For us all, hobbits are the closest to men. One day they will be as men are. Frodo is a bit larger than Bilbo, just as you are larger than Frodo. And younger still than you, and larger, are Merry and Pippin.
Nothing to do with Entraft, you're just naturally big.
It'll be those humans who might well wonder, is there hobbit in me? Is there?
Okay, so it's no, well, I'm back, but the idea of the hobbits assimilating into humankind is an interesting note to end the movie on. I mean, it's definitely meant to pander to the child watching at home. You could be a hobbit too. Anyone can wear the fuzzy feet. Into the Hobbit-verse. But considering Tolkien's notion that the hobbits are just really rare now and avoid the big folk, the idea that the descendants of hobbits are among us is interesting. In this moment, it's definitely played as a hopeful, inspiring note, but you could also read it as humanity just kind of taking over hobbitkind and erasing its culture, the gentrification of the Shire. I don't know. And then the very last notion of the movie is a reprise of the notion about not bothering to start.
If you never say hello, you won't have to say goodbye.
What is this movie trying to say? That Sam would be happier if he just never met Frodo in the first place? Like I said, this movie is interesting. And like I said, I don't think this is better than the other two movies, but by being less beholden to the literal text of the book, I find myself spending less time just comparing individual moments to the source material, and more time appreciating the strange but charming mess it is on its own, and scratching my head as I try to analyze the brand new additions it makes to the story. I don't know what all this is going for, but it's definitely going for something, and I have a weird respect for the attempt. And those are the animated Tolkien movies. A TV special, its sequel, and another completely unfinished movie in the middle. And the maker of that movie in the middle was furious about the other two, because he feared his work would be associated with them. And that's exactly what happened. I'm sorry, Ralph. It's a chaotic non-trilogy with a middle entry made by a sincere, if controversial artist, bookended by entries made by more mainstream filmmakers known for their commercial crowd pleasers, the finale of which barely even tries to follow up on the middle entry. And before you rush to the comments with your very clever and original crack about the Star Wars sequel trilogy, just remember that for decades, this was really all we had. For better or for worse, this non-trilogy was the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy. So why did so many of us grow up thinking this was a trilogy? Simple. Because Warner Brothers acquired all the studios that made the films and started selling them together. VHS and DVD 3-packs of the films led people to assume that they were always meant to go together, even though actually watching them should have cleared up that misconception. Warner Brothers took these Tolkien adaptations and disregarded their actual contents. They didn't really think about how they'd fit together as a story. They just knew that it was something they wanted to sell to cash in on people's love for this world. Fortunately, that would never happen again! The most recent DVD release of this non-trilogy really steers into making you think it is a trilogy. Look at this consistent package design, all referring to these as the original animated classics. Of course, when you put the DVDs in, you realize that's all packaging. The Bakshi movie has a DVD menu that indicates that this is a movie they put on DVD on purpose, while the Rankin Bass DVDs are so hastily thrown together using whatever default templates Warner Home Video was using at the time. The Hobbit DVD is even missing a bunch of sound effects for inexplicable reasons, which now haven't been heard since the last VHS release.
Oh, stop complaining! Oh, stop complaining! I never promised to burgle you first-class accommodation.
I cannot believe this DVD is showing such utter disrespect to Tom Clack. The Bakshi DVD doesn't have much in the way of bonus features, but it does have a documentary featurette, which is quite welcome. The Rankin Bass movies just have still slides of Tolkien facts, and that bullcrap cast and crew thing DVDs used to do, except on both The Hobbit and the Return of the King DVD, they just list The Hobbit's cast. A+ work, gang! Each Rankin Bass DVD also has From the Vault, which is just whatever loosely medieval-themed cartoons from the Warner library they felt like including. Couple of Looney Tunes, a Droopy, a Tom and Jerry. They're all fine cartoons, but they're not really a selling point. But now I really wish Warner Brothers had just done like a Carrot Blanca-style Tolkien Looney Tunes cartoon so that could be included. In a hole in the ground, there lived a wabbit. Well, despite my many misgivings, I still really enjoy revisiting this incoherent accidental trilogy from time to time. In fact, I probably revisit it more often than the Jackson movies, if only because it takes me less time to watch the cartoons, and I know many Tolkien fans have re-examined the first two movies in the wake of their Peter Jackson counterparts. And while some fans of the books are divided as to whether Jackson or Bakshi got more of Lord of the Rings right, generally speaking, more fans prefer the simplicity of the Rankin Bass Hobbit to the overwrought Jackson version. Personally, neither of them are my favorite Hobbit adaptation, but we'll talk about that next week. In the meantime, what are your thoughts on the cartoons? Love them? Hate them? Like some parts of some of them? Let's discuss this all in the comments, and until next week, this is Dave, signing off. Hey everyone, Dave here, and right now, as Tolkien Adaptation Month continues, I'm geeking out over my favorite adaptation of The Hobbit.
Dave's Obsession of the moment.
Why is The Hobbit so hard to adapt? It feels like it should be pretty easy, but so many adaptations miss the mark. I don't know, is it because it's a relatively straightforward children's fantasy story that happens to be set in a far more complicated fantasy world? Is the fundamental difficulty everyone seems to have in adapting The Hobbit simply because nobody is able to strike the right balance of honoring both the simplicity of the story and the complexity of Middle-earth as a whole? The two most prominent filmed adaptations certainly seem to represent the two extremes of this dichotomy. The Rankin Bass Hobbit has its charm, as I discussed last week, but it was under-researched, to say the least, and it really rushed through the story, barely allowing the character development or sense of humor to breathe. Then there's the Jackson Hobbit trilogy, which has almost the exact opposite problem. Dragging things out and shoehorning in not only other bits of Tolkien lore, but brand new characters and unwanted love triangles. And look, if you wanted this to be 3 movies, you probably could have gotten to that length just with a verbatim reading of all the dialogue in the book, without shoehorning in dwarf elf horniness. Yeah, I know books and film are different mediums, but that would not have been worse than this. So yeah, at this rate, we'll probably never get a truly great adaptation of The Hobbit. At least not a truly great filmed adaptation. But there are other mediums besides cinema, and The Hobbit has been adapted to many of them. There have been multiple video games of The Hobbit. Long before the LEGO games based on the movies, there was a platformer by Sierra, but not like Golden Age Sierra, just, 2003 era Sierra. While this game was definitely released with the intention to cash in on Jackson's earlier trilogy, it was completely unaffiliated with it, or indeed with any other adaptation. It had its own cartoony style distinct from the Rankin Bass version. And long before that, there was a Hobbit text adventure game by Beam Software. In case you want a taste of what a Golden Age Sierra Hobbit game might look like. Are any of these games the best adaptation of The Hobbit? Maybe. I haven't played any of them yet. So, no, none of these are the one I'm thinking of when I talk about my favorite adaptation of The Hobbit. There is also a comic book adaptation of The Hobbit. I have this copy with a cover that has a completely different art style than the comic itself. Look at this pretty boy Bilbo up here. That guy is definitely a 17-year-old YouTuber I've never heard of with 600 times my subscriber base. Meanwhile, you look inside the comic and Bilbo is straight up Friar Tuck as played by Lou Costello. Hey, Gandalf! The adaptation covers all the essential pieces of the story, and despite this misleading cover, I find the art style in it perfectly charming. In a time when the most prominent visual adaptation of The Hobbit was the Rankin Bass version, I found these character designs to be a welcome change of pace. So yeah, I think this comic book is pretty solid, but it's still not my favorite adaptation of The Hobbit. So is my favorite version the Leonard Nimoy song?
In the middle of the earth in the land of Shire, there's a brave little hobbit whom we all admire. Long wooden pipe, fuzzy woolen toes. Lives in a hobbit hole and everybody knows him, Bilbo.
I do love it, but no. The groovy music is fun, but I'm pretty sure it's not what anyone is seriously looking for in a Hobbit adaptation. Plus, I object to the song's claim that Bilbo is the greatest Hobbit of them all when Samwise exists. Of course, not every adaptation is authorized. Fan projects do deserve a place in the conversation too, since, the Rankin Bass cartoon wasn't authorized either. And out of all the fan projects I've encountered, the most creative was Hobbiton USA. This wasn't a mere piece of fan art, fanfic, or even a fan film. This was a fan-made tourist trap. This was a walking trail in Northern California that had dioramas of different scenes from the story and speaker boxes narrating the scenes. It was clearly not the most expensive representation, but it had the same kind of handcrafted charm that I love from prehistoric gardens and tourist traps like that. My Tolkien-loving family stumbled across this completely by accident when we were driving through Northern California, and we were just blown away. More by the fact that it existed than by the execution itself, but we still very much enjoyed the execution. While an even more condensed version of the story than the cartoon, with even less of the humor and characterization, the unexpected joy of discovering this experience overflowing with creative presentation and homemade charm definitely put it in my top 2 favorite adaptations of The Hobbit. But sadly, Hobbiton USA no longer exists. It was closed down long ago, and most of its elements are rotted away, vandalized, or outright stolen. It's sad that I'll never get to experience it in person again, but there is still another adaptation that I love even more. And oddly enough, it's also one that I first experienced on another family road trip, in the car's cassette player. My favorite adaptation of The Hobbit is the 1968 BBC radio version.
The Hobbit.
Written by actor Michael Kilgariff, this aired on BBC 4 over the course of 8 weeks in the fall of 1968, making it one of the few adaptations to be released during Tolkien's lifetime. I haven't found any record of if he ever heard it or what he thought of it if he did. I'm sure he had polite things to say if he heard it, but probably grumpy things to say too, because, he was Tolkien. But really, it's a miracle I got to hear it. This was almost lost forever when the master tapes were apparently erased because BBC's gonna BBC, but it was saved when a broadcast was recorded off the radio, so all current releases stem from that one backup, and I am so glad it was saved. Now, of course, this is not the only radio adaptation of Tolkien's work. Famously, there was that one Lord of the Rings where Frodo was played by Bilbo. I may talk about some of the others another time, but this is the one I love most. Both the Tolkien radio production I love most and the adaptation of The Hobbit in any medium that I love most. And I'm willing to admit that's probably largely due to nostalgia. Like I said, I first listened to this as a child on a long family road trip, and it made the drive fly by, getting to hear all my favorite parts of my favorite book brought to life. But even revisiting it today, I think this nails the tone of the book The Hobbit more than just about any other adaptation I've experienced. I think this finds the balance between the humor, the adventure, and the characterization better than anyone else.
Off we go!
Yes, but where, Thorin?
Where, my little hobbit? Why, there and back again.
Okay, I'm not sure why Taurine would be so enthusiastic about back again. Doesn't he want to rebuild his kingdom under the mountain and not return to Hobbiton for no reason? But on the other hand, subtitle drop, take a shot.
A journey from which some of us may never return.
This thing is endlessly quotable. I mean, yes, most of the best quotes are just from the book, but the delivery takes it to another level. These are now the voices I hear every time I reread the book.
We are met together in the house of our friend and fellow conspirator. This most excellent and audacious Hobbit.
Audacious?
May the hair on his toes never fall out. All praise to his wine and his ale.
To this date, nobody in my family can mention the word dark without following it up with, we like the dark. Dark for dark business.
We like the dark.
Dark for dark business.
And there are many hours before dawn.
Of course, there are nitpicks to be had. There always are. Since I brought up mispronunciations in the animated films, it would be unfair of me not to mention that for some reason, they decided that the way to pronounce just about every name is to emphasize the second syllable.
Mr. Gandalf, Taurine Oakenshield.
Beorn himself disappeared.
Okay, that's a little odd, but it's mostly not a deal breaker. But there is one pretty important name whose pronunciation stands out as just plain wrong.
His name was Galoom.
Oh, come on, that's not even how he pronounces it in this production.
Goodness.
He got his name from his harsh swallowing sound, and from a narrator changing completely how the harsh swallowing sound sounds. But that strange note aside, the performances are just delightful. Bilbo is performed by Paul Daneman, and you know how it's said that Ian McKellen's Gandalf is an impression of Tolkien giving a lecture?
And Ian based his performance of Gandalf on Tolkien. I mean, he was impersonating Tolkien.
Well, I'm pretty sure Paul Daneman's Bilbo is an impression of Tolkien just in his normal speaking style.
The actual beginning, though it is not really the beginning, but the actual flashpoint was, I remember very clearly. I can still see the corner in my house in 20 Northmoor Road where it happened. I got an enormous pile of exam papers there, and marking school examinations in the summertime is an enormous, very laborious, and unfortunately also boring.
Oh, so I should think in these parts. We are plain quiet folk, and we have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things make you late for dinner. You might try over the hill or across the water. Good morning.
Overwhelmed and befuddled are the words to describe it, and I love every stammer, every aside, every desperate attempt to regain composure. This is Bilbo to me. Heron Carvick plays Gandalf, and yes, this is vague, mysterious children's story wizard Gandalf.
Also, Taurine, I forgot to mention that with the map your father gave me this key.
A key?
Here, take it.
Is it the key to the secret door?
Perhaps. Keep it safe.
Indeed, I will.
But unlike in the cartoon, where Gandalf feels to me like a plot device who revolves around Bilbo's self-actualization, here I feel like Gandalf's mysterious actions and choices are motivated. He just chooses to keep his motivations to himself. There's a depth, a texture to the performance that gives me the sense that Gandalf's leaving not just to create more obstacles, but because he has a life outside of the Hobbit and the dwarves.
But of course. And why should they not prove true?
Well, I mean,
you don't really suppose, do you, that all your adventures and escapes were managed by mere luck, just for your sole benefit?
No, but I mean...
You're a very fine person, Mr. Baggins, and I am very fond of you. But you are only a little fellow in a wide world, after all.
Taurine is played by John Justin, and he is great. You really feel the arrogance he has due to his nobility, bubbling into his frustrations as he faces indignity after indignity.
Stand away! I am Taurine!
And yet the warmth shines through when he gradually starts to respect Bilbo.
Well, Mr. Baggins, what do you think is our next move?
I suggest we go into Esgaroth.
What, at this time of night?
Certainly. Perhaps the lake men will give us food and shelter.
Yes, I agree. Let us make ourselves known. I am grandson of the last king under the mountain. Esgaroth and all these lands are part of my domain.
Making it all the more heartbreaking when that respect is lost during the Arkenstone incident.
It was me, Taurine.
What?
Me. I gave it to them.
You gave it, you miserable hobbit!
Oh, don't don't strike me, Torrin.
You undersized burglar! By the beard of Durin, I wish I had Gandalf here.
But I only tried...
Curse him for his choice of you. May his beard wither.
Oh, Torrin, you're hurting me.
Hurting you? I will kill you, you wretched creature!
No!
In addition to a wonderful cast, the story is told so creatively, in a way that honors the source material on a level that the movies didn't really have need to. See, here's the thing. Aside from the contents of the stories themselves, one of the things that makes The Hobbit feel more like a children's story in presentation than Lord of the Rings is the more conversational style of the narration. The narration takes the tone of a man telling the story to children, taking into account the child's reaction to parts of the story, stopping to interrupt himself for clarification, and so forth. Now, canonically, the text of The Hobbit is a translation of Bilbo's memoir, There and Back Again, the first part of the Red Book of Westmarch, and the conversational tone of the narration mostly seems in character for Bilbo, except for the parts where the narrator clearly takes the position of a non-Hobbit. Such as, in the first chapter where he interrupts himself to say, "What is a Hobbit?" These parts can be reconciled in the text as Tolkien himself editorializing when translating the original Hobbit manuscripts, but that's something most adaptations ignore simply by minimizing the use of narration altogether. The radio drama instead steers into that by having two narrators. Anthony Jackson plays an unnamed narrator credited on most releases as the Talebearer, who is telling the story alongside Bilbo himself.
A perfectly round door painted green, which opened onto a tunnel-shaped hall with panelled walls and floors tiled and carpeted, and lots of pegs for hats and coats.
Well, I'm very fond of visitors, do you see?
And he was quite well-to-do.
Yeah,
The long hall wound on and on.
The dynamic of Bilbo and the Talebearer interrupting each other for clarification is a delightful framing for this children's tale, but the narrators mostly aren't used to excess. They don't include every aside the narrator makes in the original book, so I apologize if what you really wanted out of a Hobbit adaptation was to hear the story of old Bulror Took inventing golf. On the other hand, admittedly there are a few parts where the narration is used to rush through plot points.
Well, while we were resting in a cave, some goblins took the Hobbit and the dwarf...
And so Gandalf, by keeping Beorn enthralled with the story of their adventures, was able to introduce all the dwarves into his formidable presence.
On the other hand, there are also a few points where the narration isn't used that it probably should be.
At least I can move about quietly in the woods. That's one thing we hobbits pride ourselves on. We can move absolutely quietly.
Yes, we hobbits can be absolutely silent, completely silent. Let me keep talking out loud and at length about how quiet we can be. Now, one thing that I've seen some Tolkien fans criticize about this production, but I personally really enjoy, is the music. It's not the big, exciting orchestral Howard Shore score we've become accustomed to recently. It's all Renfair instruments. It makes even the non-diegetic music feel to me like it's really part of this world. As for the diegetic music, it does not include every single song from the book, because again, there are just too many, but I do like the songs that it does include. Wow, they actually did it. They figured out how to make the Goblin song unpleasant and unsettling, yet still really catchy somehow. Not as catchy maybe as the Rankin Bass take, but still catchy enough while still being way more authentic to the way the music is described. But long before that, there's another song that they get even better.
Far over the misty mountains cold.
Now, as far as I'm concerned, there has never been a bad version of Far Over the Misty Mountains Cold. It is one of the highlights of both the Jackson Trilogy and the Rankin Bass cartoon for me, but this is still my favorite version. I think the versions in the filmed adaptations are appropriately haunting and eerie, but I think this one adds magic and whimsy to that haunting eeriness. I think it balances a lot of tones and really gives me the sense that the Hobbit would be both creeped out and intrigued by this music. That he would feel the magic flowing through him upon hearing about this, but still be scared of that Tookish part waking up inside him. Now, Misty Mountains is the first song we hear because they do cut Chip the Glasses, Crack the Plates. Which, I miss it, but I understand it. They also cut the auction at Bag End at the end, but those are the only major comedic set pieces that get deleted. For the most part, they really keep the humor from the book, which I appreciate because The Hobbit is a funny book, and you don't need to make it all deadly serious like Lord of the Rings. Though since this was produced after Lord of the Rings was published, they managed to work in a few subtle references to the later books, such as Gandalf's exclamation of great elephants in the book being updated with proper Middle-earth terminology.
Great oliphants you ought to told yourself this morning. I can tell that you haven't dusted the mantelpiece.
Or the character that this book only referred to as the Elven King, getting to use his real name as a battle cry, Leroy Jenkins style. But these are just little Easter eggs peppered in to make it feel like part of the same world as the later books. They don't weigh it down like some people did in some adaptations that I am done whining about. But speaking of other Hobbit adaptations, I can't prove it, but I suspect the team at Rankin Bass heard this production because there are a few things they seem to have taken from this that don't seem to appear in the book, unless they were in an edition that I've never come across. First off, they abridged the second sentence of the book nearly the same way. Okay, so here's the line in the book. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. And here's how Bilbo says that line in the radio show.
Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, nor yet a dry, sandy, bare hole. My hole was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort.
And here's how Gandalf says that line in the cartoon.
Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, nor a dry, bare, sandy hole. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort.
Okay, I know that doesn't prove anything. In both cases, they just removed the most superfluous clauses in the sentences. Two adapters could have come to the same decision independently. Similarly to how two adaptations could have independently decided to drop Bilbo's first visit to the Sleeping Smaug before their riddle-filled conversation, the one Balin came halfway down the tunnel for. However, the stronger evidence is the stuff both adaptations add, namely Bilbo asking what runes are.
Runes, Gandalf? Runes are the ancient letters of a half-forgotten language.
Whatever are runes?
Ancient writing.
And Bilbo being especially concerned with one specific line in his contract.
Funeral expenses to be defrayed by us and... Funeral expenses?
Funeral expenses?
Again, not proof. Both of these are perfectly in character for Bilbo and make a lot of sense. It's very possibly a coincidence that both scriptwriters made these additions. But I wouldn't be surprised if Romeo Muller listened to this while writing, and if so, this is the basis of all Hobbit adaptations that came after, and for me, it's still the one to beat. I understand for running length reasons why the Rankin Bass production wanted to speed up the introduction, condense the introductions of Gandalf and the dwarves down to a minute and a half, and cut all the jokes. But the radio production keeps the good morning exchange, it keeps the escalating dwarf introductions, and it does it all in under 5.5 minutes. It is possible to keep things moving in a way that feels complete but still doesn't waste too much time, and keep the tone while doing so.
Come, Bilbo, it's not like you to keep friends waiting on the doorstep and then open the door like a pop gun.
Keep friends?
Granted, this still gets the occasional moment of being a bit too rushed. Mirkwood in particular gets rather condensed. The incident crossing the river is mostly reduced to narration.
Eventually they reached the enchanted river. Crossing it presented no problem, for, to their surprise, they found a boat moored to the bank. But even so, misfortune struck. Bumbo,
the heaviest and the fattest of the dwarves,
managed to fall into the water.
But for my money, the parts that are focused on are handled better than just about any other adaptation. Like Bilbo killing his first spider. Sure, in the animated version, it may be a pretty verbatim recitation of the scene in the text.
Now I will give you a name, and I shall call you Sting.
But there's no sense of emotion, no sense of what Bilbo is feeling about this pretty major turning point in his life. The radio version may tweak the dialogue from the text, but only to make it feel more like an authentic reaction from Bilbo.
It's dead! It's dead! I've killed it! All alone I've killed it! No Gandalf or dwarves to help me! I killed it! Oh, I did it! Still dead. Oh, well, my trusty sword, you saved my life. I'll give you a name. I shall have to call you, yes. Sting. Sting, that's what I'll call you, Sting. That's a good name for a sword.
That's what this does so well. It peppers in all of Middle-earth, but it always brings it back to Bilbo. It never loses sight of the story about an awkward, uncomfortable little hobbit taking his first steps into the world and learning how to be an adventurer. This is my favorite Hobbit because this is my favorite Bilbo. A Bilbo that feels to me like the soul of Tolkien in every possible way. I highly recommend this radio production. It is very easy to track down, so you should definitely get a copy to listen to on your next long road trip or long walking adventure. It's been released on cassette and CD just so many times, and it's available on Audible, and as of this recording, it's available on archive.org if you don't want to spend money, but we'll see how long that lasts. But however you track it down, I highly recommend getting swept up in the Hobbit's adventure through Middle-earth, in a way that brings it to life but still leaves so much to your own imagination. We may never get a filmed version of The Hobbit that works on all levels, but with so many mediums that Tolkien's work has been adapted to, nearly every fan can find the one they love most. Movies, radio, comics, video games, Tolkien's work has transcended the written word and been brought into almost every form of art. Although, one does seem to be missing. A pretty major one, if you ask me. An entertainment medium that captures the hearts of millions of people across the globe, but still hasn't included a Tolkien adaptation. Somebody should rectify that. Let's begin this adventure. The world is changing. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air. I'm David Gansel, and I know that's not a line from a theme park pre-show, but this is not only Armchair Imagineering, it's also the final week of Tolkien Adaptation Month. J.R.R. Tolkien crafted one of the richest fictional worlds in history with Middle-earth, and for decades now we've been able to visit that world through books, movies, radio, animation, theater, toys, and video games, but we still have not had the opportunity to physically step into that world. There has yet to be a Middle-earth theme park.
They should have just left that there, all the stuff that was in Stone Street, and just opened a sort of, Disneyland for Middle-earth.
Now there have been Middle-earth tourist attractions, like the Hobbiton movie set in New Zealand, or the less authorized and sadly now defunct Hobbiton USA walking trail in Northern California. But despite many rumors about attempts from Disney to get a clip for the Great Movie Ride montage, or attempts from Universal to replace Toon Lagoon with Tolkien La Gulkeen, Middle-earth remains unvisitable in a theme park environment. This may be in part due to Saul Zaentz and his iron-like grip on the IP, but possibly also because it's deceptively hard to do an appropriate translation of the text to a theme park medium. Tolkien's more Luddite themes, his distrust of the machine, would feel inauthentic in a medium whose aesthetic is pretty much machinery. Well-decorated machinery at best, but still machinery.
There was a time when Saruman would walk in my woods, but now he has a mind of metal and wheels.
Step right up, boys and girls, to the Middle-earth Midway, where you can ride the Saruman Mind Wheel! Pretty much the only types of rides you can really do are horse-drawn vehicles and non-motored boats, which theme parks can definitely have, but very rarely are they the star attractions of a park. Then again, once Tolkien's life work became a marketing tool for the Burger King Kids Club, I think things like standards went out the window. So, if we accept that we're adapting Tolkien's world into this medium, what do we do with it? Well, Tolkien crafted an entire universe with ages upon ages of stories, so there's a lot of Middle-earth to draw from. But I have to accept the fact that if I didn't read the Silmarillion during lockdown, I'm just not ever going to read it, so let's stick with the main 4 books. Now, realistically, the most we can probably expect is for another park to license Tolkien's work for incorporation into their existing theme park, with only space for one actual ride. And if that's the case, I think the best use of that one ride space is a dark ride based on The Hobbit. The book, not any of the filmed adaptations. Yes, I know, book report rides are frowned upon, but if we're working within the limitations, think of how many scenes from The Hobbit would make great vignettes in a Fantasyland-style dark ride. You'd board the vehicle, you'd round the corner and see Bilbo opening the door as the dwarves tumble into Bag End. Then you turn into the kitchen to see the dwarves chipping the glasses and cracking the plates, like this shot from the cartoon in the style of this animatronic from Pirates. Then you turn to see a projection of the silhouettes of the dwarves and Bilbo riding off into the adventure, Seven Dwarves Mine Train style. Then you ride through the giant animatronic trolls that, thanks to projection mapping, turn to stone around you. Then you swing through Rivendell where you see Elrond reveal the moon letters on the map, kinda like an inverse of the Lampwick transformation on Pinocchio. Then you duck into a crack in the Misty Mountains where you're surrounded by orcs, but you escape down a dark tunnel where you see Bilbo pick up a ring. Then you go down the tunnel where Gollum chases a Pepper's ghost Bilbo who disappears. Then you pass through a clearing with the company up the trees as orcs and wargs set them on fire, but you see the eagles start to swoop down above you, and then you turn and see the eagles hanging overhead carrying the company to safety. Then you turn into Beorn's lodgings where you see everyone gathered at the feast. Then you exit and enter the dark, narrow path of Mirkwood, move through some Snow White-esque scary trees for a while, filled with Forbidden Journey-esque spiders hanging above you until you end up in the Wood Elves' dungeon, but you escape through the river path and right alongside the barrels floating down the river to Lake Town. Then you see the thrush knock and the last light of the setting sun of Durin's Day projects the keyhole on the door, then the door swings open into the Lonely Mountain's secret tunnel, through the treasure hall, around a shining Arkenstone on a pile of gold, and past a giant animatronic Smaug looking for you. Then you leave the mountain and see Smaug destroying the lake town via projection effects, but Bard shoots him down with the Black Arrow. Then you pass through the Battle of Five Armies, orcs and wargs attacking dwarves and elves and men, and finally you find yourself back in Bag End with Bilbo writing his memoir, and you exit the ride into the Bag End auction gift shop. I think that would be a cute ride that would be a great addition to any park, but it wouldn't fully scratch the itch of entering Middle-earth. Middle-earth deserves a full park, and obviously scaled down but fully explorable translation of Tolkien's imagined world to a real-life space. The way I see it, we would enter this park the way we were brought into Tolkien's world in the text, which is to say, through the point of view of the hobbits. Our starting point would have to be the Shire. Does this mean that the entire park would be scaled as if we were hobbits, with the realms of the big folk being double-sized and staffed with exceptionally tall employees? Or would the Shire be scaled to hobbit size, with us as human-sized, and hobbits would be played by smaller actors? I don't know. Realistically speaking, scale would probably be cheated. Every part of the park would be scaled to human size, and we just pretend that we change size when we enter a different realm. That's the usual theme park move. But hey, if kids can accept a Mickey Mouse who's over 5 feet tall, we can accept a green dragon inn that's the same size as the Prancing Pony. Anyway, in my view of this, the Shire is outside the park proper. It's like the Downtown Disney or Knott's Marketplace or Middle-earth Shire Walk, if you will. There'd be the aforementioned Green Dragon and all sorts of charming little shops in the Hobbit holes, and the entry to the park proper is at the Brandywine Bridge. Alternately, I guess the Gate of Bree would also make for a good park turnstile, but I feel like the Old Forest needs to be inside the park, not outside. I guess if the park is more based on the movies, there wouldn't have to be an Old Forest at all, but who wants that? Once you make it through to Buckland, you can explore the far corners of Middle-earth, compacted down to theme park size. From Rivendell to Dale, from Mirkwood to Mordor, from Lothlorien to Gondor, every kingdom is represented with a land of some sort, even if it's just a small stretch of familiar architecture. Now, what of attractions? It wouldn't be that hard to fill these lands with typical amusement park rides, just sort of forced in to fit the theming. The Orthanc Drop Tower, the Barrels Out of Bond Rapid River Ride, the Exploding Mount Doom Log Flume, the Roller Coaster of Khazad Dûm. But while things like that would probably be necessary to make the park fun for a wide audience and ultimately profitable, like I said, it would feel inauthentic as a Tolkien adaptation to cram a bunch of cheap thrills into his carefully crafted world. I think a more authentic Tolkien park wouldn't focus on rides, but on immersion, using actors to make you feel like you are truly in Middle-earth, like Ghost Town Alive, or what I hear Evermore Park is like. I haven't been there myself yet. So yes, what I'm saying I want is a fully explorable Middle-earth where every employee is role-playing as a resident of their assigned realm, and yes, I realize that's a huge burden to put on theme park employees. They will have to be paid very well, but don't worry, they only have to be familiar with the lore of their specific corner of Middle-earth. If some smarmy guest tries to quiz a resident of Lake Town on what the hobbits were up to in the Second Age, they can just say they don't know anything about that. But yeah, in order to make this happen, somebody is going to spend a lot of time teaching a lot of teenagers Elvish. And while I don't see a lot of opportunity for rides in the authentic version of this park, other than horses and many varieties of boat, I do see plenty of opportunity for actor-driven attractions. Magic shows, stunt shows, even some Halloween-style mazes and scare zones. That's why the Old Forest needs to be inside the park, so you can walk through the haunt of the Barrow Downs. And for an upcharge experience, why not some guided tours? Sort of like the various Disney behind-the-scenes tours, except with an in-universe guide. Perhaps a Gandalf, or an Aragorn, or a Thorin Oakenshield leading you on your new adventure. You could choose to purchase different paths based on the different stories. Do you want to relive The Hobbit and make your way to the Lonely Mountain looking for treasure? That's an option. Do you want to join the Fellowship and march to Mount Doom or Gondor? Those are options. Do you want to do something that happens in the Silmarillion? Look, it's not that I don't want to read it, it's just that my attention span only goes so far, okay? Now, would this park that's light on rides but heavy on interactive character experiences satisfy me as a theme park fan? I honestly don't know. But if it was done right, I think it would satisfy me as a Tolkien fan. Certainly more so than the most likely option for an eventual Tolkien ride, which would probably be just renaming some Six Flags coaster to the Desolation of Smaug or some nonsense. But even if the attractions in this hypothetical Middle-earth park end up being kind of underwhelming, one thing is for absolute sure, the nightly fireworks will be incredible. But what about you? What do you think the best way to adapt Middle-earth to a theme park experience would be? Let's discuss this all in the comments, and wow, I can't believe we reached the end of Tolkien Adaptation Month already. There are so many other topics we didn't even begin to scratch the surface of. I think we may need to dive back into this world again next year. But in the meantime, thanks for joining me, everyone, and until next time, this is Dave, signing off.